Hi everyone. Tonight, we move quietly through the worn gates of a medieval village. The air is sharp, and your breath forms small clouds that glint like glass beneath a pale moon. Silence hangs heavy, broken only by snow crunching underfoot and the distant cry of an uneasy dog. You step onto a narrow lane where smoke twists upward from leaning chimneys, hinting at warmth inside, though comfort is limited. Winter has fully settled, and the people here understand that staying alive depends on what they stored after harvest. Before settling in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, only if you truly enjoy the content. And if you'd like, leave a comment sharing where you're watching from and what time it is. Now lower the lights and let's move further into the story. You continue forward, noticing how the houses press close together, as if sharing secrets against the cold. Frost outlines every doorway, framing the lives inside with silver edges. Indoors, families gather near open hearths. Food here is not about pleasure or choice. It is about survival. When winter storms pound the roofs, whatever sits in the pantry determines whether people remain healthy or go hungry. And here's a blunt truth, you likely wouldn't last long. You step into one home, ducking beneath the low beams. A family sits around a modest table, little more than a plank balanced on uneven legs. At its center rests a wooden bowl holding dark bread, so dense it could nearly crack a tooth. This bread is essential to life, baked from whatever grain could grow in poor soil: rye, oats, barley. Wheat, the most valued grain, rarely reached peasant homes, reserved instead for nobles and religious houses. Historians still debate whether villagers truly hated this dark bread or simply accepted it without complaint. Either way, you choose slowly. The taste is earthy and slightly sour, the texture heavy yet filling. Nearby, a pot simmers over the fire. Inside is a thin gruel, made by stretching ground oats with water and, if luck allowed, a bit of salt. The aroma is faint, barely noticeable, but on a bitter night it fills stomachs and keeps people alive another day. You watch as the youngest child clutches a wooden spoon like a prized object, warmth seeping into small hands. One widely accepted fact stands out. Across much of Europe, peasants received nearly 3/4 of their daily calories from grain. Bread, porridge, and ale were not extras, they were the core of life. In the corner, you notice an elderly woman whispering softly as she drops a dried sprig of rosemary into the pot. She believes it protects against winter illness. Small practices like this show that food was more than fuel. It served as medicine, tradition, and even belief. Some villagers claimed onion skins on windowsills kept frost spirits away. Whether true or not, she nods with quiet certainty. Still, worry shadows every meal. Supplies grow thinner, and every bite is carefully judged. You glance toward a ladder and a small iron-bound chest. Inside are precious reserves. A few hard cheeses wrapped in cloth, a salted hem slowly shrinking, bundles of leeks stored under straw. Nothing is wasted. A rat darting through the shadows is more than an annoyance, it is a threat. You feel a chill not only from the cold, but from knowing hunger is never far away. You move closer to the fire, its crackling sound like a lullaby. Children drift into sleep, faces flushed from warmth, while parents stay awake, silently counting how many loaves remain and how many weeks until spring. You, a visitor from another age, can almost hear their quiet calculations. Will the bread last? Will the ale stretch far enough? Historians continue to argue how often peasants starved during ordinary winters. What is certain is that the memory of famine haunted every home, shaping habits of caution and ritual. As your eyes grow heavy, you realize the frost lining the door is more than decoration. It is a constant reminder that winter tests both body and spirit. You have stepped into a world where every crumb matters and every fire must last through the night. You wake to a dim winter morning, where sunlight struggles to break through thick clouds. Your breath clouds the air inside the cottage, as even the dying embers in the hearth cannot fully chase away the cold. The household stirs slowly. The first task of the day is not tending animals or fields, it is reaching for bread. The loaf on the table looks nothing like modern bread. It is dark, dense, and heavy, sliced unevenly with a dull blade. The crust is so hard it sounds solid when tapped. Inside, the crumb is coarse and gray, speckled with husks. You tear off a piece. The smell is earthy, slightly sour, and smoky from the fire where it baked. This is not comfort food. It is survival. Bread dominates their diet. For medieval peasants, it provided most of their daily energy. Grain mattered far more than toppings, and the type of bread revealed social rank. Nobles ate soft white wheat bread, while peasants relied on rye, barley, or oat loaves, darker and heavier. Historians debate whether peasants longed for white bread or found it bland compared to their robust loaves. What remains clear is that grain reflected social order as much as nourishment. You sit as the family blesses the loaf and cuts it carefully. Portions are small and exact, meant to make supplies last. They eat quietly, chewing mixed with the fire's crackle. Butter is missing, cheese is rare, and the bread is often softened with thin ale. You likely wouldn't last long eating this alone. Yet for them, it offers both comfort and necessity. In difficult years, bread was stretched with peas, beans, chestnuts, or even ground acorns. One account tells of villagers mixing sawdust into flour to dull hunger. Imagine the grit scraping your tongue, splinters caught between teeth. The choice was simple: eat what you had or starve. Not all bread was treated the same. Outside in the village square, the Lord's steward gathers the grain tax. Wheat sacks are loaded onto carts headed for the manor, while peasants carry home their rye. Bread becomes more than food, it represents social structure. The Latin word companes, meaning with bread, reminds us that sharing bread meant survival and belonging. You follow a child carrying a cloth-wrapped loaf toward the church. On feast days, bread is blessed and shared, sometimes mixed with salt or holy water. Did the blessing change the taste? Historians still debate its meaning. But for villagers, faith and food blended easily. Bread fed both body and spirit. Inside another home, a woman works dough with practiced hands, her forearms lightly coated in flour. She presses it firmly against a worn wooden board, moving in a steady rhythm while murmuring a quiet charm meant to ward off hunger. The dough is left to rise near the hearth, covered carefully with cloth. A faintly sweet scent of yeast fills the room, alive but restrained. Later, she places the loaf into a clay oven, and smoke coils upward as though the bread itself exhales. This oven does not belong to one household alone. In many villages, baking takes place in a shared bakehouse. Each family marks its loaf with symbols, crosses, initials, or shallow cuts, so it can be claimed once baked. When the bread emerges, it is firm and split along the crust, but sustaining. The family gathers around it with quiet respect. To them, each loaf is more than a meal. It is protection against cold days and longer nights. The crust pushes back against your teeth. Once broken, the dense interior fills your mouth. Gradually, warmth spreads through you, not only from nourishment, but from eating something deeply tied to land and labor. You lean back, crumbs on your lips, and reflect. Could a person survive on bread alone? For many medieval peasants, the answer was yes, especially during the harshest seasons. The sameness would wear on anyone. Yet when frost presses close to the door, bread stands between survival and starvation. As the family finishes its modest meal and wraps what remains for later, you sense both the burden of their daily hardship and the quiet comfort of routine. Bread is their lifeline, rough, reliable, modest, yet treated with reverence. As morning advances, your steps crunch along a narrow path toward another cottage. Inside, the household has already turned to their second daily staple, porridge. A mother stands over the hearth, stirring a pot suspended from an iron hook above the flames. The mixture thickens as it bubbles, releasing the smell of warm grain, plain, filling, dependable. You taste it and find the texture coarse, speckled with husks. Oats and barley are common here, with millet or buckwheat depending on location. Historical records confirm that such gruels formed the foundation of countless winter mornings, eaten not for enjoyment but for strength. A pinch of salt improves the flavor. A drizzle of honey makes it almost a treat. Without either, it remains bland but nourishing. You notice a child adding dried herbs to the pot, perhaps sage or parsley. Many villagers believed certain plants could ward off winter illness or repel unseen forces that seemed stronger during long nights. Sometimes stale bread was added to the porridge so nothing went to waste. At other times, ale replaced water, giving the dish a slight sharpness. The idea of beginning the workday with beer raises a quiet smile. Yet this simple bowl carries more complexity than it appears. Historians disagree on how much variety peasants enjoyed in their porridge. Some suggest they often added peas, beans, or roots, while others argue winter meals were relentlessly repetitive. Whatever the reality, repetition clearly weighed on morale. The family eats mostly in silence, chewing steadily, though children occasionally slurp loudly to disturb the calm. As the porridge cools, it thickens further. Imagine eating this each morning for months, every bowl nearly the same. Still, within that sameness lies survival. With each bite, warmth spreads through your chest, forming a quiet barrier against the cold pressing outside. You close your eyes, listening to the crackle of firewood, the scrape of wooden spoons, and the low voices hoping stores will last until spring. By the end, it becomes clear that porridge is not merely food. It is routine, habit, and reassurance in a season defined by uncertainty. You step back outdoors and the cold air bites your face. Snow drifts lazily through the village lane, clinging to doorways and settling on your cloak. A neighbor beckons you inside her cottage, where a jug stands prominently on the table. She pours a cloudy amber liquid into wooden cups, and its sour-sweet scent rises immediately. This is not water. It is ale, the drink that underpins winter survival. You raise the cup, surprised by the taste. It is weak, closer to a light grain infusion than modern beer. This is small ale, brewed at home from leftover grains, just strong enough to make water safer to drink. Medieval records show ale was consumed daily, even by children, because wells and streams were often polluted. A mild brew was safer than untreated water. As you drink, a gentle warmth spreads through you, enough to ease the chill, not enough to intoxicate. A common practice involved reusing grains several times. The first brew was strongest and saved for feasts or the Lord's household. The second and third runs, increasingly diluted, went to peasants. By the fourth, the drink was barely more than flavored water, yet still safer than the stagnant pond nearby. Villagers joked that their children were raised on beer rather than milk. Scholars still debate how dominant ale truly was in the peasant diet. Some claim consumption reached nearly a gallon per person each day, while others argue such figures are inflated, especially during years of poor harvests. The reality likely falls somewhere in between, a steady presence of ale with meals, keeping people hydrated and modestly comforted through long winters. You look around the room. Smoke-darkened walls bear years of use, and in one corner sits a small wooden tub used for brewing. The process is demanding, heating water, soaking grains, straining through cloth, then leaving the mixture to ferment near the hearth. The air carries the damp, earthy smell of barley. Brewing was usually women's work, a practical skill passed down through generations. Without it, a household struggled to function. A spoiled batch could mean thirst or illness. Ale also served social purposes. Villagers gathered in taverns to drink stronger brews, singing beneath wooden beams while snow fell outside. The tavern's light became a symbol of warmth, one of the few places where laughter could rise above hunger. For some, drinks softened the memory of empty cupboards. For others, it was a space to exchange news, arrange marriages, or settle debts. The thin beer in your cup, though simple, links you to these daily patterns. A child nearby grips a cup, drinking eagerly. You hesitate, then recall that water could be deadly, while ale was safer. Even infants sometimes drank diluted versions, their mouths sticky with foam. Chroniclers noted that during outbreaks of disease, townspeople relied more on beer than water, believing it offered protection. Whether this safety came from alcohol, boiled water, or tradition remains unclear. As you lean back, your thoughts drift further. Picture crossing snow-covered fields with a flask of ale at your side. Each sip offers not pleasure, but stamina, a small, steady source of strength. Farmers drank it before chopping wood. Shepherds carried it while guarding flocks. Women sipped it as they spun wool beside dim fires. In every case, ale was less a luxury than a quiet companion through winter's endurance. One intriguing story tells of villagers who seasoned their ale with heather, nettles, or even mushrooms, believing these blends sparked visions or bravery. Were they simply unusual brewers, or were they early testers of folk remedies? There is no clear answer, yet such tales drift through history like smoke. The jug on the table runs dry, and the household prepares another brew. Grain is valuable, but the decision is sensible. Drink unsafe water, or give up some barley to make ale. The fire glows as a woman stirs the pot, steam rising gently into the room. You close your eyes and catch the soft hiss of boiling liquid, the low rhythm of a song she hums to measure the brewing time. In that moment, it becomes clear that ale is neither a luxury nor an excess. It is a core part of daily life, safer than the stream, warmer than the cold, and modest enough to be present in both celebration and hardship. With each sip, a peasant survives another hour of the unyielding winter. Your cup is empty, but the taste of barley remains, along with the quiet murmur of voices and the understanding that without this murky drink, many villages would fail long before spring arrived. You move past the smoky cottages, following hedgerows stripped bare and dusted with snow. The fields lie silent and white. Still, small rises in the ground hint at what remains from the autumn harvest. Beneath straw and overturned baskets, vegetables persist against the odds. These are not impressive crops, but they are essential. Turnips, leeks, onions, and sturdy cabbages, all grown with the certainty that winter always arrives early. A farmer kneels in the frost, brushing away straw to uncover pale leeks. Their scent is sharp and fresh, recalling soil locked in ice. He wipes them on his tunic and passes them to his wife, who will chop them for the evening stew. Archaeological evidence confirms that root vegetables such as leeks and parsnips were common in peasant gardens, largely because they endured cold better than most grains. Without these resilient plants, meals would have been even more meager. Another survival method involved storing vegetables in pits dug straight into the ground. Families packed them with carrots, turnips, or beets, then sealed them with straw and mud. The soil served as a natural cooler, slowing decay. Picture digging into frozen earth to reach food while your fingers ache and the wind cuts sharply. Even so, this task was repeated time after time, each success a small triumph over winter. Scholars still debate how varied these gardens really were. Some claim peasants grew a wide range of plants, from beans and peas to herbs, while others argue that winter diets shrank to only a few hearty options. The reality likely changed from village to village, shaped by soil quality, weather, and chance. Even so, it is easy to imagine families tending their plots in autumn, hoping their cabbages would last until March. You step closer and notice an unusual sight hanging from a shed's rafters. Long braids of onions twist together, each bulb faintly shining, their dry skins whispering when touched. Hanging them this way kept them dry and slowed spoilage. It is a practical solution that also carries a quiet beauty, a golden chain of endurance. Nearby, dried beans still in their pods rattle softly in the cold air, another reserve waiting for the soup pot. Inside a cottage, vegetables are prepared for cooking. Turnips are cut into chunks, their pale flesh firm, then dropped into a pot with barley and herbs. The scent slowly deepens, earthy and mild, filling the smoky space. Children lean forward in anticipation while their mother reminds them that waiting makes the meal last. When you finally taste the broth, it is thin, yet it carries the grounding comfort of the soil itself. Certain beliefs come to mind. In some areas, villagers thought cabbages planted during a waning moon would keep longer in storage. Others believed leeks hung by doorways could ward off witches. Whether superstition or hopeful habit, such ideas show how uncertain food supplies felt during harsh winters. Imagine trusting that a whispered charm over a turnip might hold hunger at bay. It may sound quaint, but in those conditions, every ritual held meaning. Historians continue to argue over how well-fed peasants truly were. Some suggest that access to vegetables, grains, and occasional dairy meant their diets were more balanced than often assumed. Others point to frequent shortages, vitamin deficiencies, and signs of poor health such as weakened bones. As you chew the tough stalk of a leek, It seems likely that both views are true. One winter might be manageable, the next devastating. Outside once more, you cross a small garden edged with woven branches. The ground crunches beneath your feet, frozen hard, yet traces of autumn remain. Kale leaves curl tightly. Herbs lie blackened by frost. A few determined carrots still hide beneath straw. Chickens peck at the soil, searching for scraps. The scene is calm, but underneath it is a network of careful planning, storage, and quiet hope that sustained peasants year after year. These concealed gardens were not indulgences, but defenses. Every cabbage, every braid of onions, every turnip buried in earth meant one more day kept at bay from hunger. Bread and ale alone would never have been enough. Even beneath snow, the land still offered its gifts to those who remembered where to find them and were lucky enough to reclaim them. You draw in cold air tinged with earth and smoke, carrying the image of those frost-protected gardens with you. They stand as evidence that even in the harshest months, life continues to push forward, leaf by stubborn leaf. As snowfall thickens, you slip into another dwelling. The roof creaks under the weight, and a chill leaks through the walls. Inside, the air is heavy with wood smoke and a more tempting scent. The clear smell of salted meat. Above the hearth, strips of pork and beef hang together, darkened and glossy from weeks of curing. This is not fresh meat, but it represents survival. The household takes pride in this supply. Preserving meat required effort and resources, yet it offered a rare sense of security through winter. Records of medieval life show that pigs were central to peasant farming, slaughtered in late autumn after feeding on scraps and acorns, then salted and smoked to last through the cold season. The meat was dense, tough, and often overly salty, but each mouthful provided much-needed energy during frozen days. One lasting image is the communal event known in some villages as the pig killing. It was a shared task and a social gathering, where neighbors helped with the butchering and marked the harvest together. Songs were sometimes sung, ale flowed freely, and fresh pieces were eaten right away before the rest was stored. Children went to bed with greasy hands, aware that the remaining meat would be stretched carefully over many months. Still, historians disagree on how often peasants actually ate meat. Some believe pork was mostly reserved for special occasions or slaughter time, while others argue that small amounts, salted and diluted in stews, appeared more often. Animal bones found at sites suggest meat was present, though certainly not an everyday pleasure. As you watch the mother shave a narrow strip of pork into the pot, it becomes clear that meat added flavor to meals but rarely took center stage. You lean closer to the hearth, observing as fat drips into the flames, crackling softly. The smell spreads through the tight space, smoky and rich, far more inviting than yesterday's plain porridge. Even a small piece of pork simmered with cabbage or turnip could turn an ordinary dish into something worth remembering. Children's faces light up at the sight of fat glistening across the broth's surface. Imagine the lift in spirits that came from knowing tonight's food would taste fuller, deeper, more satisfying. There were dangers, of course. Salt was costly, and not every family could afford enough to preserve large quantities of meat. Some tried to stretch what they had, risking spoilage that could make an entire household ill. Others conserved their supply by blending animal fat with grains, producing stews where meat served more as seasoning than substance. As you watch the pot bubble, you wonder whether the salty note on your tongue signals careful preservation or quiet desperation. Then there is lard. Stored in clay jars or animal bladders, it became a steady companion through winter, spread on bread, mixed into porridge, or rubbed onto cooking pans. Records consistently show that fat was a vital source of energy, a defense against bitter cold. Without it, bodies weakened fast, unable to endure the labor of hauling water or gathering firewood. A single spoonful of lard might seem modest, yet it could mark the line between collapse and stamina. A curious folk belief comes to mind from rural Europe. Smoked hams were sometimes hung not only for preservation, but to protect against evil forces. Some households tied charms to their meat hooks, fearing witches might spoil their stores. Did they truly think a resentful neighbor could curse a ham? Possibly. When winter tightened its grip, suspicion spread easily, and every precaution felt necessary. Scholars still debate the balance of dairy, fish, and meat in the peasant diet. Was salted pork the mainstay, or did fish and cheese appear more often? Excavated refuse pits reveal bones, shells, and pottery shards, yet exact proportions remain unclear. For you, seated near the fire and watching salted beef soften in the pot, the debate feels distant. What matters is the steam rising, the promise of flavor after days of dull grains. Night arrives early. The family gathers, tearing bread to soak in the stew. The salted meat is tough, nearly rubbery, but its richness spreads through the broth, making every mouthful filling. A child gnaws on a knucklebone, satisfied, while the father saves a strip of fat for the next morning. Nothing goes unused. Not skin, not marrow, not organs. Even the pig's bladder may become a pouch, its bristles turned into brushes. You close your eyes, tasting the faint sweetness of smoke on your lips, and recognize how valuable these stores truly are. Without salted pork, beef, or lard, winter meals would shrink to bread and roots alone. Meat, in any form, offered not just strength but morale, a sense that careful planning in autumn had paid off. As the wind shakes the shutters, you feel thankful for salt and smoke, quiet guardians of the hearth, keeping hunger at bay just as fire holds back the cold. The wind sharpens, banging loose shutters and sending crows into the air. You walk along the village edge where fields fade into forest, sensing another aspect of survival, the hunt. For most peasants, game was not meant for them. Law and privilege tightly protected forests as the property of lords. Yet hunger ignores statutes, and in the harshest winters, snares and slings came out of hiding. You crouch beside a boy checking a simple trap, a cord loop concealed beneath snow. Today, fortune favors him. A rabbit struggles weakly, caught by the leg. The boy acts quickly, murmuring a prayer as he ends the animal's pain. Chroniclers note that hares, rabbits, and small birds often appeared in peasant stews despite the risk of punishment. Officially, these woods belonged to the manor. In practice, hunger claimed them as well. One account from a Yorkshire village lingers in the records. A man was fined for poaching deer, yet the court observed that his children were thin as fence rails. At times, mercy softened judgment, though rarely by much. Imagine risking a beating, or worse, for a hare that might barely feed one household. Yet the alternative was hunger, gnawing like a wolf at the door. Experts remain divided on how common such poaching was. Some argue it happened only in moments of extreme need. Others suggest it was a quiet, ongoing part of village life, protected by silence and shared understanding. After all, a snare leaves little evidence, and neighbors often chose not to see. The question remains unsettled, but the boy's anxious glance tells its own story. Tonight, his hunger speaks louder than the law. Later, inside the cottage, the rabbit is skinned with steady hands. The scent of raw flesh mixes with smoke, sharp and metallic. Every piece is kept, meat for stew, hide for a pouch, bones for broth. The animal becomes more than food. It turns into a set of resources, proof that nothing here is wasted. That evening, you taste the stew, richer than cabbage alone, lightly sweet, carrying the wild note of the forest. Here, too, superstition lingers. Some villagers believed eating hare granted speed, that a child fed rabbit meat might run faster, resist illness, or avoid bad luck. Others whispered that deer were sacred and should never be killed. These contradictions reveal the narrow line between fear and need, between respect for nature and the constant pull of hunger. You recall how firmly church and crown guarded hunting rights. Royal forests stretched across England and France, where cutting wood or trapping a bird could bring harsh punishment. Yet in the shadows of peasant life, survival reshaped the rules. No decree could quiet an empty stomach. The stew thickens with barley and leeks. The family gathers, bowls warm in their hands. The father murmurs thanks for the forest's mercy. The boy smiles at his small victory. You eat with them, tasting warmth that feels slightly forbidden, a borrowed gift from the woods. Hunting here was never sport. It was a risk. A wager against the law, against watchful eyes, against starvation if the trap failed. Still, every rabbit, pigeon, or squirrel taken in winter pushed death one step farther away. Outside, the wind howls, but inside, bellies are fuller and spirits steadier. Rabbit bones rattle softly in the pot, simmering into broth that will last until morning. You lean back, breath heavy with smoke and meat, sensing the fragile balance between defiance and survival. The village path leads you toward a frozen stream, its surface sealed with ice, reflecting the pale gray sky. You kneel and tap it with your knuckles. It holds firm, yet beneath it you hear faint movement, water murmuring under winter's shell. Here food still lives. While fields sleep and game hides deep, fish remain, waiting for those who can reach them. You watch two figures approach, wrapped in worn cloaks stitched and repaired many times. They carry iron-tipped poles and woven baskets. One kneels, striking the ice with quick, practiced motions. Before long, a hole opens, dark water shining sharply against the surrounding white. He lowers a net weighted with stones, whispering a quiet charm for good fortune. Chroniclers throughout medieval Europe recorded scenes like this. Peasants depended heavily on rivers, ponds, and streams as winter lifelines, catching eels, carp, or pike when other food sources disappeared. Fish were more than nourishment. They were duty. The church required abstinence from meat on many days, and fish became the necessary substitute. Another technique unfolds nearby. The second man lays out a long, forked pole, easing it into the water and moving it slowly from side to side. Patience matters more than strength. Without warning, he thrusts downward and pulls up a twisting eel, its slick body shining in the frozen air. Villagers commonly preserved eels in clay jars or smoked them, their rich flesh supplying vital calories. Strange as it sounds today, eels were once a reliable staple, so plentiful they were even used as rent payments to monasteries. Scholars still debate how abundant freshwater fish really were. Some evidence points to steady access for peasants, while other research suggests fishing rights were tightly regulated, much like hunting, and controlled by lords or abbeys. Both views may hold truth. Official rules restricted access, yet daily necessity often overruled them. For the men at the riverbank, written law matters less than the pull of the net in freezing water. The basket begins to fill. A carp flashes dully, its scales catching light before dropping inside. Smaller, quick silver fish slip from grasping hands, though a few are secured. The scent of river mud clings to them. You imagine how that flavor will change once simmered with leeks and herbs, turned into a soup that pushes warmth back into stiffened bones. As you walk with them, you hear another curious belief. In some villages, fish drawn from beneath ice were thought to carry protective power, guarding homes against famine. Families sometimes hung dried fish above doorways as charms. Were these beliefs superstition or gratitude? Likely both. The river was unpredictable, yet generous. Inside the cottage, work begins. The women clean the fish with steady motions, scales scattering across the table like frost. Guts are saved for animals, bones set aside for broth. Nothing is discarded. Soon a pot simmers with fish stew, thickened by barley and flavored with onion. The smell is strong and earthy, far from the refinement of a noble's feast, yet rich enough to fill the room with promise. Records clearly show that during Lent and on Fridays, fish became the main dish for nearly everyone, regardless of status. For peasants, this meant rivers and ponds were not comforts, but obligations. Imagine the strain of knowing your household must find fish every week, even when nets return empty. Families adapted, stretching salted herring brought inland from the coast or boiling bones into thin broths. The taste might fade, but the observance mattered as much as the meal. You taste the stew. The broth is salty, the fish soft, but threaded with bones. You spit one out, smiling at the minor irritation. The children laugh, already trained to chew slowly and avoid sharp splinters. Warmth spreads through you, and for a moment the cold beyond the walls feels distant. Another survival method comes to mind. In northern regions, villagers buried barrels of fish in snow to ferment. The result was harsh and overpowering to outsiders, yet packed with nutrition. When fresh catches failed, the smell might repel strangers, but to locals it meant survival preserved. Scholars continue to debate whether peasants resented church fasting rules or accepted them as part of life's rhythm. Did fish become a dull obligation, Or did it offer welcome variety? Watching the family savor each spoonful of eel-rich broth, eyes briefly closing as if tasting something rare, the answer seems clear for tonight. Fish is not burden but gift. Later, as bowls empty and bones clatter back into the pot, you step outside again. The stream murmurs beneath its icy surface, still hiding life. You imagine nets splashing, poles striking, voices lifted in cautious hope. Winter stretches on, but the river endures, quietly reminding all that beneath the ice, life continues. In that quiet promise rests the peasant's faith. As long as water moves, hunger can be held back one more day. Snowbanks soften as you near another home. Before entering, a faint, tangy scent reaches you. It is neither wood smoke nor sharp onion, but cheese aging patiently in the cool corners of the house. Hard wheels wrapped in cloth, small rounds tucked into baskets, soft curds resting in pots, all signals of preservation and resolve. You crouch to examine one wheel. Its rind is uneven, rough beneath your fingers. Cut open, it reveals a pale, ivory interior, firm and dry. Monastic records note that monasteries produced large amounts of cheese, trading or selling it to nearby villages, and peasants made their own when cows or goats allowed. For families able to keep livestock, cheese was a winter safeguard. Its fat and protein stood in when fresh milk vanished with the cold. A small detail draws your attention. In some regions, villagers stored cheese in ash or wrapped it in nettles, believing this protected both flavor and fortune. Others rubbed rinds with herbs or salt to slow mold. Picture lifting a clay lid and finding the quiet scent of time clinging to the wheel inside. This is not only food, but care layered into every bite. Food historians still argue about how central dairy was to peasant diets. Some suggest milk was often sold or owed as rent, leaving little for families. Others reply that hardy goats and sheep ensured at least modest supplies of curds and butter year-round. The reality likely differed by valley, shaped by climate, herds, and obligation. For this household, the orderly stack of rounds shows cheese as a clear lifeline. You watch the father slice thin pieces, laying them carefully atop dense rye bread. The cheese tastes sharp, slightly nutty, cutting through the bread's heaviness. The children chew seriously, as though each mouthful carries meaning beyond hunger. Cheese is never wasted. It is portioned carefully, made to last. A generous slice today may mean scarcity tomorrow. The process behind it holds your attention as the mother explains, hands tracing familiar motions. Milk warmed near the hearth, rennet mixed in, curds cut and pressed, whey drained away. The whey, pale and thin, is always reused, fed to pigs or added to stews. Every part serves a purpose. Curds are shaped, salted, and left to age in the coldest corner. The children peek often, eager for the day the rind firms and the cheese fully becomes itself. Records show that in the hardest winters, dried curds were ground into powder and stirred into porridge or soup, turning meager meals into something sustaining. You taste such a dish now. And although the taste is subtle, it deepens the meal much like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Its strength is quiet, unseen yet undeniable. Another unusual belief surfaces in your thoughts. Some villages claimed cheese made beneath a full moon lasted longer, while others believed it spoiled more quickly. A few even suspended small curd wheels from rafters as protection against hunger. True or not, these customs reveal a powerful connection between nourishment and belief. Each wheel of cheese represented more than food. It was a safeguard carried into uncertain seasons. Scholars still discuss its symbolic role. Cheese often appeared in religious settings, offered as tithes or placed on feast tables. Did peasants feel pride in sharing their modest curds, or resentment at surrendering part of their reserves? Records offer no answer, but the mixed emotions are easy to imagine. Thankfulness for blessings, frustration over loss. Still, tonight the cottage feels steady. The family eats bread and cheese, a simple combination linking them to one another and to generations of endurance. You chew carefully, noticing the salt, the firmness, and how the flavor remains long after swallowing. Unlike porridge, cheese provides both taste and sustenance. It is easy to understand why peasants felt relief when their animals produced enough milk for curds. Later, as the fire dims, you spot small wheels tucked beneath straw in a chest. Their scent blends with wood smoke, earthy and sharp, offering quiet reassurance that tomorrow will not arrive empty. You realize how remarkable this detail is. To us, cheese is commonplace. Here, it marks the line between hardship and comfort, sameness and variety. As you settle back, another thought emerges. This modest will travels through time, carrying the warmth of autumn pastures into winter's cold. Each bite is not merely survival, but remembrance. The echo of green fields, of cows lowing in sunlight, of goats clattering across hills. It is summer preserved for nights when snow weighs down the roof. The wind sighs through the thatch as you step into a smaller cottage at the village edge. The scent here is lighter than meat or cheese, delicate and faint. A hen clucks softly in the corner, feathers puffed against the cold. She scratches near the hearth, pecking at crumbs the children scatter. Beneath a woven basket lies winter's quiet prize, eggs. You lift one carefully. The shell is thin, its surface slightly rough under your fingers. Winter eggs are rare. As daylight fades, hens lay less, and in deep cold some stop entirely. Historical accounts show that medieval peasants valued even a few eggs, saving them for feast days or adding them to thin stews to enrich the broth. Their taste was fuller than porridge, lifting morale as well as strength. A curious custom lingers. The children whisper that placing the first egg of the year beneath the threshold will protect the household from hunger until spring. In some regions, eggs were dyed or blessed long before Easter traditions formed, symbols of renewal hidden within winter. You smile at the thought of finding a single fresh egg on a bleak morning. Scholars still debate how often eggs appeared on peasant tables. Some argue they were too valuable for regular meals, more commonly sold or given as rent. Others suggest that small flocks provided a slow but steady supply, enough for stews, breads, or occasional treats. The truth likely falls between these views, a scarcity that turned each egg into a choice: eat it, trade it, or save it for a holy day. You watch as the mother cracks 2 eggs into the evening pottage. The yolks glow softly in the dim light, blending with barley and cabbage. The broth thickens, releasing a richer scent that seems to fill the room. The children lean forward, eyes wide, as though something extraordinary has been added. In a sense, it has. One egg can elevate an ordinary meal into a feast. The father slices bread, dipping it into the stew to catch the yolk's richness. The taste surprises you, smooth, warm, and comforting in a way roots and bread alone cannot match. The richness lingers, spreading warmth through your chest. You reflect on how easily modern diets overlook eggs. Here, 1 or 2 can brighten an entire week. Records show that eggs also carried symbolic meaning in medieval life. They were offered as tithes, used in remedies for illness, and sometimes buried in fields to bless the soil. Villagers might even pass an egg over the sick, believing it could draw out disease. These practices, strange to us, reveal how closely food and faith were linked. When resources are limited, even the smallest item gains meaning. The children, still hungry, scrape the pot clean, licking traces of yolk from their fingers. Their laughter fills the smoky room, lighter than the night before. 1 egg has changed the mood. You see that survival here is not only about nourishment, but about restoring hope. Later, you step into the moonlit yard. Hens rustle in their coop, feathers shifting softly. A faint warmth rises from the straw bedding where tomorrow's eggs may or may not appear. Uncertainty is part of the rhythm. Some days yield nothing, others bring small blessings. A superstition comes to mind. Villagers believed witches could steal a hen's ability to lay through whispered charms. To guard against this, women placed iron nails near the coop or marked crosses on the door. Whether believed or not, such actions show a quiet urgency to protect every fragile shell. Imagine relying on such a small creature, hoping each morning for a smooth, oval gift in the nest. As you walk away, breath clouding the air, you sense that eggs were more than food. They were hope, delicate and uncertain. Each shell was a promise, fragile yet strong enough to carry a family through another winter day. In that promise lies endurance, not grand feasts or lavish banquets, but the simple crack of an egg into a clay pot, the soft hiss as yolk meets broth, and the quiet joy of children tasting something golden on the darkest nights. The path between cottages narrows, snow-packed firm by countless steps. You enter a larger home where the air feels heavier, rich with the scent of fat. Not the sharp smell of roasting meat, but the lingering presence of butter and lard stored with care. These pale, unremarkable foods are as vital as bread or porridge. They support survival in ways easily overlooked. On the table, clay jars line the edge, each sealed with cloth and string. Inside, pale butter sits hardened by cold, its surface speckled with straw from storage. Beside it rests darker, smoother lard, spooned into a jar months earlier during autumn slaughter. Archaeological evidence confirms how widespread fat storage was. Peasants relied on fats not only for energy, but to bring flavor to meals that might otherwise remain plain. One notable preservation method involved keeping butter in brine or burying it in bogs so it could last for months. Picture digging into the ground and uncovering a lump of butter still usable after an entire season underground. Some even claimed bog butter developed a richer taste, though to modern palates it might seem more earthy than appealing. Even so, the creativity behind it is clear. When survival is at stake, no solution is dismissed as too strange. Historians still debate how often peasants actually consumed butter. In certain areas, landlords claimed rights to dairy products, forcing families to surrender their best churnings. Elsewhere, particularly in Northern Europe, butter was common enough to appear on the table daily. Lard, however, was more reliable. Every pig provided fat, and households guarded their white jars as carefully as treasure. You can almost feel the reassurance it offered, an unseen reserve of energy against long hours of work in frozen fields. You sit near the hearth as a mother slices a loaf of rye bread. She spreads a thin layer of butter, pale and firm, across the crust. The flavor is modest yet meaningful. The bread softens, the taste deepens, and suddenly the meal feels more complete. Even a small amount turns survival food into something approaching pleasure. Children argue over portions, sneaking fingers into the pot when adults are distracted, their mouths gleaming with fat. Historical records show that lard formed the base of countless stews and porridges. A spoonful stirred into boiling barley made a dramatic difference. What might otherwise be thin and bland became thick, hearty, and filling. You try it yourself, watching the fat melt into the broth as the aroma quickly grows richer. Hope flickers in the smoky room as bowls are handed around. A curious folk belief comes to mind. In some villages, butter was believed to hold protective qualities. Families smeared it on doorframes at New Year to bless the home or rubbed it on cattle horns to guard their health. Others left small pieces at crossroads as offerings to roaming spirits. It seems odd to imagine wasting such valuable food on ritual. Yet when fear and belief exist together, even fat becomes sacred. The family you observe now treats their lard with care, scraping it only when needed. A clay pot is opened. The surface is smooth and white as the father drops a lump into a pan, where it sizzles and spits. The smell fills the room with promise. Soon cabbage and onions fry in the lard, the aroma spreading warmth through the space. The steady sound of sizzling is almost soothing, a rhythm tied to both survival and comfort. Some scholars argue that diets rich in butter and lard gave peasants the strength to endure heavy labor, while others suggest such diets caused long-term health issues. The evidence remains unclear. Skeletal remains show both physical resilience and signs of malnutrition, suggesting that fat provided energy but could not correct all deficiencies. Still, in this cottage, its effect is visible. Cheeks glow with warmth, laughter fills the room, and for one evening at least, hunger fades. Later, as bowls are scraped clean, children lick their spoons with satisfaction. Their mother cleans the pots and seals the jars again, placing them in cool corners away from pests. Each jar represents another meal, another day endured. You think of the modern refrigerator, then look around this cold, smoky room where clay and straw serve the same purpose with far less certainty. Historians continue to debate whether butter was a luxury or a staple. But as you wipe grease from your lips, the answer feels clear here. For these villagers, it is both. It marks the line between blandness and flavor, between fatigue and stamina. It is survival made visible in every shining spoonful. As you settle near the fire, the scent of fried cabbage clinging to your clothes, you realize winter survival depends not only on grain or meat. It also depends on what melts into the pot, spreads across bread, and lingers on the tongue long after eating. Butter and lard may appear humble, but in winter they are wealth measured not in coins, but in calories. By morning, the snow has eased, and the air feels crisp and clean after the storm. As you walk toward the edge of the village, a new scent draws your attention, sweet, rich, and warm. Inside a simple cottage, a family gathers around something special, a small clay pot of honey. In a world where sugar has not yet become part of daily life, honey is the rare treasure that lifts both food and spirits. You lean closer as the pot glows softly in the firelight, its sticky contents shining like captured sunlight. Medieval records confirm that before imported sugar became available centuries later, honey was the primary sweetener for peasants. Bees were both valued and feared. Their hives were carefully kept in wicker skeps or hollowed logs. Villagers endured stings and smoke to collect the thick amber liquid, knowing it brought joy unlike anything else during winter's dull months. A small ritual unfolds before you. The father dips a wooden spoon into the pot and drizzles a thin line of honey onto bread, handing it carefully to the youngest child. The child licks it slowly, eyes wide, savoring the sweetness as if it were magic. In some regions, parents gave honey to infants to calm them, believing it soothed both body and spirit. To you, it feels indulgent. To them, it is summer preserved in a jar. Scholars still debate how common honey truly was in peasant diets. Some believe beekeeping was widespread, even among poorer families. Others argue that much of the honey was taken as rent or tribute to lords and monasteries, leaving little behind. Like many foods, its availability likely depended on location, plentiful in some areas and rare in others. Even so, in this home, honey clearly stands out as a seasonal treat, used sparingly to brighten the hardest days. The mother stirs a spoonful into a steaming bowl of porridge. The scent changes immediately. Plain oats become fragrant and inviting. You take a bite and notice the transformation. Sweetness softens the rough texture, turning survival food into comfort. It is easy to see why honey appeared in festival meals, poured over bread or mixed into ale. Even a small amount shifts the mood at the table. Records also show that honey served as medicine. Medieval herbals praised it for treating sore throats, wounds, and fevers. Mixed with garlic, it became a common cough remedy. Combined with herbs, it was used to soothe burns and cuts. You imagine villagers rationing it carefully, valuing the jar as both food supply and healing tool. Another belief emerges from folk tradition. Bees were thought to represent luck and order. Families whispered news of births, deaths, and marriages to their hives, fearing misfortune if the bees were ignored. During funerals, a hive might be draped in cloth to prevent the bees from leaving. The bond between bees and community, between honey and harmony, feels fitting as you watch the family savor the golden sweetness. The pot is sealed once more, wrapped snugly in cloth, and placed high on a shelf, far from eager hands. It will remain untouched for days, perhaps weeks, until another meaningful occasion demands it. For now, the children lick their fingers, smiling, their cheeks still sticky. The happiness stays in the room long after the sweetness fades. You step outside again. Snow crunches beneath your boots. Your thoughts drift to the bees themselves. Hives tucked away at the forest's edge. Alive even in cooler months when sunlight allowed. The steady buzz of wings in summer, now absent, preserved instead in liquid gold for the long, dark season. Honey was more than nourishment. It was sunlight saved, a promise that warmth and blossoms would return. Historians note that honey also had a place in brewing. Mead, a fermented drink made from honey, featured in celebrations, though its cost often kept it beyond everyday peasant life. Still, when a jar of honey became drink, it could lift a holiday above the ordinary. Picture yourself sipping that sweetness while snow stacks against the door, your spirits briefly lifted by the taste of summer captured in wine. Back inside the cottage, the fire crackles softly, and a faint scent of honey lingers in the air. The family settles into routine, strengthened not just by calories, but by morale. You recognize how vital such moments were. Winter was not only about lasting through hardship, it was also about hope. And honey, rare and golden, was hope made tangible in every drop. You close your eyes, recalling the sticky sweetness on your tongue, the hum of bees in distant fields, and the promise of spring sealed inside a clay pot. In that moment, it becomes clear. In the harshest months, survival depended not only on bread and meat, but on small comforts that reminded people why survival mattered. You follow a narrow path into the woods, branches bowed under frost. The forest floor, though covered in snow, still hides traces of warmer seasons. You kneel, brushing aside brittle leaves, and uncover scattered hazelnuts buried in the soil. Their shells are rough and cold, but inside is dense, oily nourishment. For medieval peasants, nuts and dried fruits were not daily treats. They were seasonal resources carefully stored to endure the lean weeks. Household records show that people gathered hazelnuts, acorns, and chestnuts in autumn, keeping them in sacks or dry pits. When winter tightened its grip, these small stores became invaluable. The sharp crack of a hazelnut shell against stone signaled quiet relief, proof that the forest still offered something. The flavor, sweet, earthy, faintly buttery, broke the monotony of meals built around grain and cabbage. Folk traditions reveal another survival habit. In some villages, nuts were threaded onto cords and hung from rafters to dry and to ward off misfortune. Children often treated these strings as playthings, stealing one nut at a time until only the cord remained. Such small customs added meaning to lives otherwise shaped by repetition. Scholars still debate how often dried fruits like sloes or crab apples appeared in peasant diets. Some argue they were uncommon, since drying demanded time and fuel, both scarce resources. Others believe wild berries dried by sun or hearth were frequent enough to add brief bursts of sweetness to stews and breads. Archaeological finds of berry seeds in latrine pits support this view somewhat, though certainty remains out of reach. Were these foods routine or rare pleasures? The question persists, echoing like bees around summer hedges. In one cottage, you observe a woman cracking hazelnuts with a stone, dropping the kernels into boiling porridge. The scent changes at once, nutty and warm, blending with the grain. The children lean closer, waiting, while the father adds a handful of dried crab apples, shriveled yet sharp. The porridge, once plain, now carries sweetness and texture. You taste it and feel a quiet satisfaction. Very little was added, yet the difference is striking. Records show that in extreme scarcity, villagers relied on acorns, soaking them to remove bitterness before grinding them into flour. The process was slow, and the result far from pleasant, but acorn bread eased hunger. You imagine the smoky scent of such loaves baking in a communal oven, coarse in texture, harsh in flavor, yet sustaining. A curious belief surfaces from old tales. Some people thought hazelnuts carried wisdom, that eating them sharpened the mind or granted insight. Irish legends spoke of salmon gaining knowledge by consuming hazelnuts. Did peasants laugh at such stories as they cracked shells by the fire, or quietly hope that a handful might bring clarity during dark days? You move deeper into the woods where birds dart among bare branches. Here, shriveled berries cling stubbornly. You pick a few sloes. Their skins are tough, their taste sharply sour. Properly dried in autumn, they might have flavored pies or syrups. Now they sting your tongue. Still, you sense the comfort they once gave, adding color and taste to winter's pale meals. Scholars also note the medicinal role of dried fruits. Rose hips, rich in vitamin C, were brewed into tonics to fight winter illness. Villagers may not have understood why they worked, but they trusted their warming effect. Picture yourself drinking a hot cup of berry infusion as snow howls outside, each sip reconnecting you to summer fields. In another home, you see a sack of walnuts, darker and harder to crack. The father works steadily, breaking them open while children nibble the soft kernels. Oil shines on their fingers as they laugh, wiping their hands on their tunics. For a moment, winter feels less heavy. Nuts were temporary, but while they lasted, they transformed routine meals into small celebrations. The question remains: were nuts and berries minor additions or quietly essential? The answer likely lies between. They did not supply the bulk calories that bread and porridge did, but they offered variety, comfort, and morale, easing hunger's edge. Survival was not only about fuel, but about holding despair back. As the fire dims, you close your eyes and recall the crunch of hazelnuts, the sharpness of dried sloes, the sticky sweetness of crab apples. These were not feasts. They were small notes in the winter diet. Yet within those notes lived humanity, the desire to taste, to enjoy, even under strain. You stand and leave the cottage as wind rattles bare branches outside. Beneath the snow, roots grip firmly and stored nuts wait in silence. Winter survival, you realize, was written not just in loaves and hams, but in overlooked treasures slipped into bowls, brightening the long path toward spring. Snow crunches underfoot as you return to the village center, where smoke from many chimneys rises in pale gray streams. You step into another cottage, greeted first by a scent, sharp yet calming. Herbs simmer in a pot. Not the rare spices of distant trade routes, but familiar plants gathered nearby. These do not belong to nobles or traders, but to the modest abundance of the cottage garden. On the table lies a bundle of dried stems tied with twine, thyme, parsley, dill, and wild garlic, harvested months earlier. Though brittle now, they still carry a strong scent. Records clearly show that peasants depended on these herbs not only to improve the taste of otherwise plain meals, but also to treat injuries, reduce fevers, and soothe winter coughs. The aroma rising from the cauldron confirms this. A basic barley stew becomes deeper and richer, almost refined, with just a small handful of herbs added at the right time. A small detail draws attention in the corner. The grandmother lifts a sprig of rosemary, not for cooking, but to gently move it through the air while whispering that it drives away bad humors and unsettled spirits. In some areas, villagers even placed garlic cloves in doorways, believing they could repel witches or prevent illness. The sight brings a quiet smile. Food and belief are so closely linked that cooking itself becomes a ritual. Historians still debate how effective these herbal practices truly were. Some point to the antibacterial properties of garlic and onions as genuinely helpful, while others argue most customs were superstition wrapped in tradition. It is possible both views hold truth. You take a sip and feel warmth that goes beyond nutrition, as though belief itself adds flavor to each spoonful. The mother explains how she dried the herbs at the end of summer, hanging them from ceiling beams where smoke helped prevent decay. Now, in the heart of winter, she crumbles them into stews with steady hands. Dried thyme breaks easily, releasing a sharp scent when crushed. Even a small amount turns thin broth into something satisfying. Imagine how meaningful this change would be when food supplies must last for weeks. Monastic records note that peasants often passed down knowledge of healing plants through generations. Parsley aided digestion, sage eased sore throats, fennel helped during childbirth. These teachings, part memory and part belief, strengthened community bonds. Even without scientific proof, the rituals provided confidence, which was nearly as valuable as medicine. When winter nights felt endless, another custom comes to mind. Villagers sometimes brewed green drinks from nettles or sorrel, even in cold months, believing they kept the blood strong. Children were encouraged to drink the bitter liquid, grimacing as mothers reassured them. Boiling removed the sting of nettles, leaving an earthy flavor that symbolized health. You glance again at the pot on the hearth. Barley simmers below, cabbage floats above, and herbs drift between like green sparks. The broth carries layered scents, sharp parsley, mild dill, strong garlic. The family leans in, breathing deeply before tasting. Flavor here matters as much as sustenance. Without it, winter meals become draining. With it, even a modest dish feels renewed. Historians still question whether peasants had access to imported spices at all. Rare documents mention pepper or cinnamon appearing in villages, usually through gifts or illicit trade. For most people, however, herbs were the true source of flavor, grown from their own land. This reality shaped their taste, earthy, sharp, and tied directly to the soil beneath them. You dip your spoon again. The taste is simple yet layered, a blend of green notes against grain. Warmth spreads through you as you exhale, recognizing how much comfort can come from dried leaves. The children laugh quietly, dipping bread into the stew, their lips shining with steam. For a brief moment, the cottage feels less like a struggle against the cold and more like a place of shelter built on flavor and belief. Later, as the pot empties, the grandmother stores the remaining rosemary in a small pouch and hangs it near the door. She murmurs one last charm, trusting it will keep hunger and illness outside. Whether one believes her words or not, the calm it brings to the household is real. These herbs do more than add taste. They comfort, protect, and remind the family that they are not helpless against winter's reach. As you step into the crisp air, a simple truth becomes clear. Survival is not only about eating enough. It is about small moments of taste, ritual, and belief that remind tired people why they endure. Fragile and fragrant, the herbs become winter poetry written in steam and whispered hopes. You move carefully along a narrow lane where frost clings to wooden beams. Before entering, a familiar scent reaches you, sharp and unmistakable: onions. It cuts through smoke and damp air, signaling that this cottage, like many others, relies heavily on the humble bulb. Inside, baskets sit against the wall, filled with onions of various sizes, their dry skins rustling as the mother sorts through them. Some are pale and smooth, others dark and rough, all stored since autumn in cool, dry places. Historical sources consistently show that onions were among the most vital vegetables in medieval kitchens. They grew reliably in poor soil and stored well, lasting deep into winter after other crops disappeared. Another custom catches your attention. The grandmother peels an onion, not for the pot, but to rub across the door threshold. She whispers that it will block sickness. In parts of Europe, onions were braided and hung inside homes, believed to absorb foul air or repel harmful forces. Picture entering a smoky, crowded hut and seeing bulbs hanging like odd decorations. Practical measure or superstition? Likely a mix of both. Modern scholars still debate the onion's exact importance compared to vegetables like leeks or cabbage. Some argue they held equal value, while others point to onions' frequent appearance in manuscripts, recipes, and household accounts. Whatever the argument, the smell filling this room makes it clear this family trusts the onion's sharp strength. You sit near the hearth as the mother chops onions into the simmering pot. The rhythm of the knife is steady, striking wood with dull sounds. Tears run down her face, yet she continues unfazed, used to the sting. In the pot, the onions soften quickly, their sharpness mellowing as they blend with turnips and barley. When the father pours the stew into bowls, thick steam rises, rich and fragrant. You taste it sweet at first, then biting, filling your mouth with layers of flavor. The onion turns plain liquid into something memorable. Records show onions were also used as medicine. They were crushed into pastes for wounds, mixed with honey for coughs, and roasted to ease ear pain. Some workers ate raw onions with bread before labor, believing the sharp taste gave them strength. The bite certainly wakes your senses, far more than plain porridge ever could. A curious story surfaces in conversation. During severe winters, some villagers placed a halved onion on the windowsill, believing it would draw sickness out of the home. By spring, the darkened bulb was discarded, seen as proof it had absorbed the season's dangers. Whether faith or placebo, these rituals show how deeply food was tied to survival, both physical and spiritual. Scholars continue to debate whether peasants grew onions mainly for their own tables or to meet rents and tithes. Records indicate both outcomes. Baskets of onions were delivered to lords, yet enough remained for stews and simple remedies. You can sense the burden of giving away part of your supply while knowing each bulb could mean a warmer, fuller winter meal. Children chew raw slices with bread, their faces tightening at the sharp taste before bursting into laughter. Even in hardship, the sting of onion turns into a small game. You join them, biting into a thin piece and feeling the heat burn your tongue, lingering long after it is swallowed. Oddly, it leaves a warmth in your chest, a reminder that survival is rarely pleasant, but it is always meaningful. As night settles, the baskets are covered once more with cloth, their valuable contents carefully stored. A string of onions hangs near the rafters, moving slightly in the draft, and it becomes clear they represent more than food. They serve as protectors, seasonings, medicines, and symbols. You step back into the frost, the sharp scent still on your lips, carrying the understanding that peasants depended on onions as both defense and nourishment. In every pot, every cure, and every charm against unseen threats, the humble bulb played a quiet but essential part. In the stillness of the snowy path, you reflect on how much weight such a simple vegetable carried. There is no grand feast or rare spice here, only a bulb pulled from the earth, holding enough strength to push families one night closer to spring. Overnight, the snow thickens, dulling all sound, and you wake to a world hushed, as if the village itself is holding its breath. Inside one cottage, however, the mood is tense. A family gathers at the table, not to eat, but to take stock. A half-empty sack of grain lies open as the father runs his hands through the remaining kernels, his brow tight with worry. The fear in his expression is familiar, recorded again and again in rolls of memory and local accounts. Grain was the foundation of medieval life. Barley, rye, and oats made up daily bread, yet they were vulnerable. Too much rain could ruin a harvest. A sudden cold spell could halt its growth. The gap between having enough and facing disaster was narrow. The family before you understands this well. Every scoop from the sack is a decision. Every loaf is a risk. One survival method appears here. Villagers sometimes stretched flour by mixing in peas, beans, or even ground weeds. In harsher times, chestnuts or acorns were added. These loaves were rough, bitter, and often barely tolerable, but they filled empty stomachs. Picture chewing bread so hard it strains your teeth, yet feeling thankful it exists at all. Hunger does not seek pleasure. It demands endurance. Historians still debate how often true shortages occurred during so-called normal years. Some believe most villages, aside from major disasters, managed to feed themselves, though modestly. Others point to records of frequent dearths when prices soared and unrest broke out in towns. Skeletal evidence showing malnutrition supports this darker view. The reality may have followed a cycle, enough one year, scarcity the next, with every winter shaped by uncertainty. You watch as the mother carefully measures grain into a small wooden bowl. Her hands are steady, but her eyes are tired. She pours it onto the millstone, and the slow grinding begins. The rhythm is steady and calming, like a heartbeat filling the room. Flour dust rises into the air, settling in the children's hair until it looks as though snow has followed them inside. The flour produced is dark and flecked with husk. There will be no soft white bread here. That kind is reserved for nobles and monasteries. This bread will be heavy, nearly stone-like, filling but plain. The father sighs, aware that months remain before the fields turn green. He mutters that the sack may not last. His voice is quiet, but the children hear it, and their laughter fades. It is well documented that medieval villages feared not winter itself, but the loss of grain. Grain was food, currency, rent, and tithe. When a lord claimed his portion, there was less for the household. When the church required offerings, families gave even as their stores shrank. Shortages, then, were more than hunger. They were crises of duty. A curious belief comes to mind. In some places, villagers set a single grain on the windowsill, trusting it would multiply by spring. Others carried small pouches of seed beneath their clothes, hoping body heat might encourage abundance. These acts may seem simple, but they reveal the desperation of lives ruled by weather and chance. You dip a slice of today's bread into the stew and taste it. The texture is dense, almost sticky, with a sour edge from the rye. It fills you but offers little comfort. Eating it feels like taking in a reminder of limits. Still, for the family, it is life itself, even as each slice grows thinner. Researchers also note the mental strain of scarcity. Imagine the fear of watching sacks empty, of deciding whether to eat more now or survive later. In some recorded famines, parents reduce their own portions to feed their children, sometimes collapsing from exhaustion. The weight of such choices hangs silently in this cottage as the father counts kernels with his eyes. Scholars continue to argue over how villages responded. Did communities share resources, or did each household stand alone? Records suggest both. Some villages supported one another through custom, while others fractured under pressure. Tonight you sense both possibilities. The family guards its grain carefully, yet whispers about neighbors who have even less, leaving you wondering if sharing will come. As the bread cools, it is divided evenly. The children chew slowly, stretching each bite, while the parents remain quiet. The air is heavy with more than smoke. It carries calculation and unspoken fear. You step outside into the frozen stillness. The fields lie buried beneath snow, concealing the soil that will decide the future. You realize that winter is not only about what peasants eat now, but about what they fear they may lack later. Hunger is not only absence. It is anticipation, gnawing months in advance. As moonlight glints across the frozen ridges, you sense the echo of countless winters before this one, the rustle of empty sacks, the steady grind of tired millstones, the prayers whispered over fields that may or may not yield mercy. The cold deepens, as though the village itself sinks further into silence. You pass shuttered windows with faint candlelight behind them and feel a heaviness unrelated to snow. Inside one cottage, a group sits close together, not over food, but over memory. Their voices are low and grave as they recall winters when grain ran out and the word everyone feared was famine. History records that Europe faced repeated waves of hunger during the Middle Ages. The Great Famine of 1315 to 1317 stands out most clearly when relentless rains destroyed harvests across much of the continent. Crops rotted in the fields, livestock drowned in mud, and entire communities watched their food disappear. Chroniclers of the time wrote of people eating cats, dogs, and in hushed tones worse. Though centuries have passed, the memory of such winters endured in peasant stories for generations. Shaping fears like shadows cast across every hearth, one story surfaces as you listen. An elderly woman recalls how her grandmother once mixed ground bark into flour, creating loaves barely edible but enough to keep families alive. Others speak of gnawing on boiled nettle stems, or chewing roots hastily dug from frozen soil. These tales are part memory, part legend, yet they reveal how human ingenuity stretches under the pressure of starvation. Scholars still debate the death tolls of medieval famines. Some claim mortality was catastrophic, wiping out entire regions. Others argue that many communities endured, even if scarred. Written records, often by clerics or lords, are fragmented and inconsistent, exaggerating or understating losses. Yet for the family before you, these debates mean little. Famine is not a statistic. It is a living inheritance, retold each winter to teach children the value of every crumb. A father speaks softly of a year when no bread could be baked because the grain ran out by February. Villagers foraged like animals, scouring hedgerows for acorns, boiling grass until it lost its bitterness. His voice trembles as he recalls neighbors wasting away, not suddenly, but slowly. Each day brought weakness, each week another death. The children listen wide-eyed, bowls empty but imaginations full, caught between fear and fascination. They are not starving tonight, but these stories settle deep within them. Famine is not history. It is a presence that could return at any moment. These tales serve more than memory. They are warnings in disguise. Ration carefully, plant wisely, never grow complacent. Even in times of relative plenty, famine haunted minds like an unwelcome guest. Bread on the table carries caution, not comfort. Parish records show famines often reshaped communities. Some villages lost so many people that fields lay fallow for years. Others experienced migration as survivors sought better land. Hunger also gave rise to new customs, sharing feasts, preserving food carefully, storing seed grain under lock and key. Famine reshaped not just diets, but identities. One peculiar belief appears in the old woman's story. Her ancestors hung straw crosses over granaries, convinced it would ward off hunger spirits. Elsewhere, villagers lit bonfires on frozen fields to chase away the curse of cold. Ritual or desperation, these practices show how people tried to control forces beyond their reach. You close your eyes, picturing gray skies over famine-stricken fields, the smell of rot, the silence of empty barns. You imagine trudging through mud, belly hollow, clutching any edible scrap. Suddenly, the modest porridge you ate yesterday feels like a luxury. The past weighs heavily on the present, teaching gratitude through fear. Historians continue to debate famine's causes, natural disasters like frost, drought, or plague, versus political and social systems that worsened hunger. Some argue that taxes, obligations to lords, and poor distribution deepened suffering. Others see nature as the primary culprit. Likely, both played a role. The peasants themselves would care little about causes. Hunger is its own language. As the family concludes their stories, they light an extra candle, as if brightness might ward off famine's shadow. Children fall asleep with whispers of bark bread and nettle stew in their ears, while adults remain by the fire, silent with memories of hunger. Outside, the cold presses hard, and you realize famine was never just an event. It was a character in peasant life, a predator shaping habits, faith, rituals, and the sense of time. Even with full bellies, its shadow lingered. Every winter remained a gamble. Snow crunches beneath your boots, sounding less like frost and more like bones. You carry the stories as they did, reminders that survival in winter was never guaranteed, only borrowed. Parish church bells faintly echo through the frosty air as you reach the village square. Villagers move slowly, cloaks patched repeatedly, yet faces carry anticipation. Today is a saint's day, and the church has promised food. Inside the stone church, the smell greets you, roasted meat, rich and savory, almost impossible in the bleak midwinter. Memorial accounts note that church feasts punctuated the monotonous diets of the poor. While lords and abbeys dined lavishly, peasants shared in holy day offerings, meat from cattle, sheep, or pigs, often slaughtered for ritual. These feasts were both spiritual and material relief, moments when hunger gave way to abundance. A scene unfolds. Children press eagerly against trestle tables, waiting for beef dripping with fat. A priest blesses the food, sprinkling holy water as he slices portions onto coarse bread. Families cross themselves, whispering gratitude that today, for once, their meal has flavor and fullness. In some regions, feasts even included sweet puddings or spiced ale, luxuries rare for the poor. Historians debate the generosity of these feasts. Some see meaningful relief, others view them as symbolic. Perhaps the truth lies in the middle. For one night, hunger is forgotten, but the next morning brings bread and porridge again. Still, the memory of abundance lingers. Villagers gather at long tables, steam rising in plumes, the air filled with laughter, chatter, and the clatter of knives. You taste tender mutton, juices soaking into coarse bread. The flavor brings delight, imagining how miraculous it would seem after weeks of roots and broth. The warmth goes deeper than the food. It is the warmth of community, of being part of something larger than individual struggle. One tradition surfaces. Bones from the roast are given to the poorest families, boiled repeatedly for broth. In some villages, marrow bones are hung over doors as charms for abundance. Practical and poetic, the church offers both nourishment and hope. Feast days also provided fish on Fridays and during Lent. Salted herring or dried cod sometimes arrived from distant coasts. These rare luxuries brought wonder, connecting villagers to worlds beyond their fields. A reminder that the world stretched far beyond the fields and forests you knew. Scholars remain divided on the motives behind such generosity. Was it true charity, a way to bind communities together, or a strategy to secure loyalty and reinforce hierarchy? For the hungry families before you, the question matters little. They eat, and for tonight, their bellies are full. You notice how joy transforms the atmosphere. Children run with greasy fingers. Elders smile through gaps in their teeth. Even tired mothers laugh as they sip spiced ale. The sound differs from quiet meals at home. Louder, freer, almost defiant against the cold pressing in outside. You feel it too, the unusual intoxication of shared abundance. Later, as platters empty and candles burn low, the priest speaks of gratitude and endurance, reminding villagers that winter is God's test. Yet, though solemn, the people still smile, their bellies lined with meat and bread. They will carry this memory back to their cottages, speaking of it for days. The taste may fade, but the reminder of possibility lingers. Stepping outside, the night is crisp, stars scattered overhead. The square is quiet now, bones and scraps taken home, footsteps crunching away into darkness. These feasts were more than meals. They were interruptions in scarcity, small windows of abundance, proof that even the harshest winters allowed moments of celebration. You carry the warmth of roasted meat and laughter with you. Hunger will return tomorrow, but tonight, the village has eaten together and for a few hours, known joy. The faint glow of dawn glimmers against icy rooftops as you move toward the village center. The square transforms every week into a marketplace, even in winter. Snow is shoveled aside. Straw is scattered underfoot, and rough stalls are propped with planks and poles. The air is sharp but alive with bartering voices, coins clinking, sacks shifting across weary shoulders. Markets were vital to medieval life. Villagers who produced extra beans, dried peas, bundles of onions, or small cuts of salted fish brought them here to exchange for what they lacked. Without such gatherings, isolated households might face starvation alone. Markets tied communities together like threads in a patchwork cloak, offering resilience when the cold bit hardest. You drift past stalls piled with winter staples. A sack of dried beans spills onto a table, small, pale, and unassuming, yet dense with protein. A fishmonger unwraps cloth layers to reveal slabs of salted herring, their smell pungent, cutting through the frost. Across the way, a woman arranges woolen mitts she has knitted, hoping to trade them for flour. The air is full of contrasts: sustenance, survival, modest pride. A curious custom draws your attention. A farmer sprinkles ashes over a pile of turnips, muttering that it keeps away rot and thieves. Whether superstition or clever deterrent, the gesture amuses children who giggle at vegetables protected against greedy hands. Humor masks the truth: every turnip is precious, every theft a blow. Researchers debate how accessible markets were to peasants. Some argue inflated winter prices placed most goods out of reach, especially during shortages. Others note that barter systems, trading cloth for beans or labor for fish, kept even the poorest households connected. Observing the crowd, you see both truths. One man walks away empty-handed, unable to pay for salt, while a woman secures a loaf of bread by promising to help mend nets come spring. You approach a stall where barrels of salted fish stand like sentinels. The merchant chips away ice from the lids, releasing a strong briny aroma. Salted herring, cod, or sprats, staples brought from coastal towns deep into the countryside. For inland villages, such fish were both exotic and essential, especially on days when church forbade meat. Leathery in texture and harshly salty, when boiled with barley and onions, it becomes nourishing. You imagine the relief of acquiring even a small piece, knowing it can stretch across multiple meals. Nearby, a cloth merchant shakes out rough wool bolts. Families eye it longingly. Warmth is as vital as food. A mother whispers to her child that they will wait until lambing season to spin more wool. The harsh trade-offs are evident: a sack of beans for a strip of cloth, calories for comfort, each barter a heavy choice. Markets were also hubs for news. Between trades, villagers exchanged stories: who fell ill, who lost livestock, rumors of war or famine. Survival was as much about spirit as body. Gossip buzzes. One man reports wolf tracks in the snow. Another insists the Lord's tax collector will arrive earlier this year. The murmurs weave into the air like smoke. One scene amuses you. A child offers hazelnuts to a tanner for scraps of leather, which she fashions into crude shoes for her brother. Forest food traded for human protection, an example of necessity shaping creativity. Here, value is measured not in coins alone, but in need. Experts debate whether markets empowered peasants or reinforced dependence on wealthier farmers and merchants. Evidence suggests both. Some households strengthened, others sank deeper into debt. Yet today, wandering among stalls, you feel the vibrancy of a community knitting itself together, however unevenly. The smells are overwhelming: smoke from roasted chestnuts, tang of dried fish, sweetness of honey cakes baked by the priest's cook and sold for a few coppers. You taste one, honey clinging to your lips, and feel gratitude for such a rare treat. Around you, laughter rises as neighbors greet each other, voices warming against the chill. As dusk falls, the market winds down. Goods are packed, coins counted, promises exchanged. Families trudge home with baskets strapped to their backs, contents meager but meaningful. Even a small sack of beans adds variety to stews. A scrap of cloth brings warmer nights. Snow crunches beneath your boots as you reflect on these gatherings. Markets were not luxuries. They were arteries through which survival flowed, fragile but vital. They reminded peasants that though winter pressed hard, they were not alone. Each trade, each story, each clinking coin was a quiet act of resistance against hunger. As the last stall closes, the square empties, and the village returns to silence. You carry the memory of that vibrant scene, a brief flare of life in the dead of winter where beans, fish, and cloth proved survival was never a solitary act. The market stalls vanish into the night, but another weight lingers: obligation. You pass cottages with doors shut tight, candles flickering faintly behind shutters. Inside homes, conversations rarely revolved around recipes or storage. They centered on dues. For peasants, grain was not merely sustenance. It was also tax, tithe, and rent. During winter, when every kernel mattered, surrendering it felt like giving away survival itself. Records show that peasants owed portions of their harvest to their lord, often in grain, demanded regardless of hunger. A sack that could feed a family for a month might instead be carried off to the manor. The church sometimes claimed its tithe as well, 1/10 of the yield, even in years of scarcity. Imagine watching your children eat thin bread while the best wheat sits locked in the Lord's granary. In this village, families developed coping strategies. Some disguised poor-quality grain as tribute, mixing in husks and chaff. Others feigned illness or secretly hid portions, burying jars beneath floors. Officials sometimes prodded dirt floors with iron rods, searching for hidden stores like treasure hunters. Every visit from a steward became a moment of dread. Scholars debate how harsh these obligations truly were. Some argue that lords adjusted dues in poor years to keep tenants alive. Others insist exploitation was relentless, driving families into shortages while estates remained well-stocked. Likely, the truth varied. Some places showed mercy, others none. Tonight, in one cottage, parents speak in hushed tones about what portion they can give without starving. The father measures rye, each scoop a small wound. The mother looks away as the pile diminishes. Children watch silently, their games forgotten. The hollow sound of grain falling into the sack echoes loss. Tomorrow, the steward will take what is owed, indifferent to weather or hunger. Taxes were not always paid in grain. Sometimes they came in labor, repairing roads or tending the Lord's fields instead of their own. In winter, even these tasks stole time from collecting firewood or caring for animals, pressing down on already weary households. Elders recall peculiar practices. One family once baked their tithe into bread, hoping the steward would not notice its poor quality. Others claimed charms over the granary could multiply grain, softening the blow. In desperation, resistance and ritual often overlapped. Eating tonight's bread, one tastes more than flour. The crust is hard, the crumb dense, and each bite carries bitterness, not from flavor but from the cost, dignity, agency, the sense of owning what you grew. Experts note such burdens often sparked resentment, leading to uprisings. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England, for instance, grew from anger over taxation layered on hardship. Rage simmered quietly in cottages like this one. As evening deepens, the family seals the sack, tying it with frayed rope. The father places it by the door, the children go to bed half full, and the parents sit quietly, staring into the fire, faces etched with worry. Outside, across the village, similar rituals unfold. Grain is measured and surrendered. Snow crunches beneath boots, a cart waits on the manor road. The system is efficient, relentless. Survival for peasants was not just about food, it was about what they were forced to give away. Taxes bit hardest in winter, turning bread into tribute, harvest into debt, and survival into a negotiation with power. In a modest cottage lit by a single candle, warmth comes not from the firewood, which burns low, but from women at work. Survival depended on creativity, stretching scraps into sustenance. women bore the central burden of food management. They planted kitchen gardens, preserved herbs, dried beans, and salted vegetables. They decided when to portion flour, slaughter hens, or open a jar of lard, every choice a gamble. Feed today or conserve for tomorrow. You watch a mother soften stale bread in broth, layering it with cabbage and onions. The result is humble but hearty, a form of recycling common in households. In some regions, women even boiled bones into gelatin for porridge. Scholars debate how much autonomy women truly had, but daily survival relied heavily on their ingenuity. Archaeological evidence, worn ladles, charred pots, smoke-stained walls, attest to countless hours at the hearth, mostly unacknowledged. Daughters join the work. One grinds dried peas into coarse flour, another shreds turnip greens saved from autumn to stretch the dish. Their laughter mixes with the crackle of the fire, forming a rhythm of survival. Women also brewed ale, churned butter, and preserved cheese. Recipes lived in memory, repeated gestures, whispered instructions, stir until it smells right, or add salt until it feels heavy in your hand. Tonight, the mother's precise pinching of herbs demonstrates this knowledge, passed down through generations. Villagers once believed that songs sung at the hearth could bring luck to the food. Some believed that bread mixed without humming would crack, or that broth stirred in silence might spoil. True or not, these habits endured, blending comfort with necessity. In this cottage, music is as essential to cooking as onion or salt. Historians continue to debate the quality of peasant diets managed by women. Were meals monotonous and scarce, or surprisingly varied thanks to gardens and resourcefulness? Evidence suggests both. Some winters dragged on with endless bread and cabbage, while others offered brief creativity, nuts in porridge, herbs in soup, honey on feast days. The key factor was often the skill of the woman at the hearth, stretching resources beyond expectation. You taste tonight's dish, softened bread with cabbage and onion, earthy and satisfying. Each bite reflects care more than abundance. You choose slowly, thinking of the countless decisions behind this bowl. Should she have saved bread for tomorrow? Preserved the onions instead? Every mouthful is nourishment and compromise. Later, the mother employs another trick. She scrapes the last fat from a pot and spreads it thinly on bread slices. Meager, yet the gesture turns plain crust into something richer. The children smile, licking fingers, hunger eased, if only briefly. This is not indulgence. It is artistry, the ability to coax comfort from almost nothing. Outside, wind rattles loose shutters, yet the women keep working, mending clothes, spinning wool, repairing baskets. Survival is not only in what is eaten, but in what is saved from decay. Their hands stitch, patch, and preserve. Each repair is as vital as each meal, part of the invisible system keeping families intact through long winters. Watching them, you realize these women are far from background figures. They are architects of endurance, silent engineers of survival. Without their choices and tireless labor, hunger would have consumed families faster than frost. And as you step into the cold night, smoke and cabbage clinging to your cloak, the truth becomes clear. Winter was survived not by bread alone, but by the hands that stretched it, flavored it, blessed it. Women kept kitchens alive, and in doing so, kept entire villages alive. Their strength was quiet, yet echoed in every bowl, loaf, and hum by the fire. You enter a smaller cottage, roof low and door sticking against snow. Inside, air feels thin, as if hunger itself resides there. A family sits close to the hearth, bowls scraped clean. Children watch every movement as their mother wipes a pot with bread, determined to lose nothing. Historical records show that children often survived on scraps after adults ate. Parents, desperate yet practical, prioritized filling small stomachs to preserve life. Mothers sometimes went without, slipping their share into a child's bowl, a silent sacrifice repeated night after night. You see it here. The father eats slowly, leaving half his portion for the smallest child. A curious custom appears at meal's end. Children scrape bowls with spoons until the sound becomes rhythmic, almost playful. In some villages, this was called singing the pot, a ritual where children licked dishes clean as both game and necessity. Parents sometimes claimed it drove away famine spirits, a reminder that joy and hunger could coexist. Experts debate how much food children consumed versus adults. Some argue children were fed sparingly, seen as less productive laborers. Others suggest parents bent survival rules to feed children generously, securing future workers. Archaeological evidence shows both malnourished and surprisingly robust skeletons. Hunger was never evenly distributed, and the debate continues. You watch as the mother retrieves a wooden bucket. At its bottom is thin broth from last night, now a jelly. She scrapes it out, warms it, and divides it among her children. Their faces brighten as if receiving a feast. You taste it too, a faint flavor, a ghost of onions and herbs, stretched beyond reason. Children were often tasked with scavenging. In winter, they searched hedges for nuts, dug frozen ground for roots, or gathered dung for fuel. Every small effort aided family survival. One child shows a pouch of dried rose hips, shriveled but red, collected weeks ago. Tart, almost sour, they carry the memory of summer, a treasured offering to parents with little else to give. The grandmother recounts a peculiar belief: children eating the first bread scraps at night would dream of full tables in spring. Dreams were comfort, something to cling to during dark nights. Here, scraps are more than food, they are sparks of hope. Researchers note that children's play often revolved around food: pretend feasts with stones and sticks, songs about bread, rhymes about porridge, coping mechanisms to endure scarcity. Outside, laughter rises as the older child forms a snow cake, pressing it proudly into a dish. The others giggle, yet eyes still dart to the empty pot inside. Parents' faces are drawn, edged with worry. Scraps alone cannot last. Tomorrow brings the same challenge. Yet tonight, faint smiles appear, warmed by children's joy in licking spoons and tapping bowls. Survival is not only calories. It is morale, the strength to endure another day. Scholars remain divided on family survival. Some argue communities intervened to ensure no child starved. Others paint a harsher picture, with weak children perishing quietly. History's silence leaves questions unanswered, but truth shows in parents' eyes. Each winter was a gamble, and not all gambles succeeded. The hearth glows low. Children curl together, sharing warmth. Bellies are neither full nor empty. The mother tucks a thin blanket over them, humming softly. Her voice cracks, but children close their eyes, comforted. Scraps are not only food, they are resilience. Each crumb proves the family survived another day. As you leave, snow crunching underfoot, faint laughter mingles with fire crackle. You carry the image of small hands scraping bowls clean, a fragile song of defiance against hunger. Winter survival depended not on feasts, but on turning scraps into hope, empty bowls into instruments of endurance, and keeping children laughing even when cupboards echoed with absence. The church bell tolls again, not to mark a feast, but another Friday. You follow villagers along a snow-covered path, their breath rising in the cold dawn. They carry no meat for market, no livestock to slaughter. Instead, baskets hold fish, dried beans, and dark bread. Today is a fasting day, as the church mandates, and across the countryside, thousands adjust their meals to rules that shape both faith and survival. Fasting was deeply woven into medieval life. Nearly half the calendar carried dietary restrictions: Fridays without meat, weeks of abstinence during Lent, vigils before holy days. For nobles, this meant elaborate fish dishes, sauces thickened with almonds, or pastries made without lard. For peasants, meals were simpler: bread dipped in thin broth, boiled beans, or salted herring shared among many hands. Fasting was routine, a rhythm as steady as the seasons. Inside a small cottage, the family lays a loaf of rye bread and a handful of beans on the table. The father crosses himself, murmuring thanks to God for providing even this modest meal. He deliberately pushes aside a pot of salted pork hanging in the rafters, showing restraint to heaven and example to his children. The youngest stares longingly but says nothing. They all understand the rules. Scholars debate how much fasting truly reduced caloric intake. Some argue it stretched supplies through spring. Others suggest peasants compensated with extra bread and fish, making the nutritional loss minor. Either way, Fasting altered mealtime rhythms, reinforced discipline, and shaped identity. To refuse was unthinkable. To obey meant survival in both body and spirit. Tonight, the family boils beans in a clay pot. The smell is plain and earthy, filling the smoky air with quiet promise. They eat slowly, dipping bread into broth, chewing carefully. You taste it too, simple, soft, warming. Fasting is not just about restriction. It's about valuing the humble foods that sustain life when meat is forbidden. The grandmother claims that faithfully observing fasting protects against famine. She recalls a winter when her poor family survived harsh months without hunger because they respected every abstinence day. Faith and practicality intertwine. Rules conserve stores and comfort the spirit, assuring villagers that obedience invites divine mercy. Fish dominated fasting diets: salted herring, dried cod, even freshwater eels. Tonight, the family unwraps a slab of herring, its sharp briny smell filling the room. The father slices it thinly, barely enough for a taste each. Yet, added to the beans, the broth deepens, richer than bread alone. For a moment, eyes close in satisfaction. Scarcity shared through ritual can feel abundant. Fasting also brought variety, breaking monotony of meat and dairy. For peasants, it was burden and blessing. Restrictions removed fat and pork but encouraged creative use of beans, peas, and fish. Tonight, dried herbs brighten the pot's flavor. The result is simple but different. Difference itself is valuable in a season of repetition. Children whisper as they gnaw on crusts, imagining Easter feasts of eggs and cheese when fasting ends. Their shining eyes prove ritual offers both rules and hope. Each meager meal is a step toward celebration, each abstinence day a reminder that plenty will return. A story surfaces. In youth, villagers believed breaking a fast brought misfortune to livestock. A boy eating pork on a Friday supposedly doomed his family's pigs the following year. Whether tale or truth, such warnings reinforced obedience. Food was physical, moral, spiritual, symbolic. Chewing a bean thoughtfully, you listen to the wind. The meal is plain yet calming. Rhythm, warmth, and quiet prayer combine into a meditative moment. Fasting, far from deprivation, offers structure, meaning, and solidarity. Villagers observe together, hunger shared and softened. As the table clears, scraps of bread saved for tomorrow, you sense peace. They have obeyed, conserved, endured. Tomorrow meat may return, but tonight, the ritual sustains them. Stepping outside, stars glitter above frozen roofs. The village feels quieter. Fasting was another way peasants survived winter, slowing consumption, binding communities, giving purpose beyond hunger. Survival depended not just on food but endurance. The night grows colder, stars shimmering like ice. Following a narrow track, you reach the village edge where cottages cluster against the wind. Inside one, neighbors gather, bowls and loaves in hand, pooling resources. Tonight is no church-mandated feast. It is a shared meal born of necessity. Medieval peasants often relied on neighborly exchange to endure hard winters. One family contributed onions, another beans, another dried meat. Together, the central pot became richer than any household could manage alone. The practice fostered both community and sustenance. Near the hearth, a woman adds barley, a man drops in a marrow bone, children toss in herbs, laughing. Steam and comforting aromas rise. This is no banquet, yet the combined efforts make it remarkable, more than the sum of its parts. Experts debate how common communal meals were. Some say only in severe scarcity, others as a seasonal routine. Archaeology shows large shared cauldrons, but debate persists. Tonight, the bubbling broth is proof that cooperation mattered. And as the pot boils, another peculiar custom lingers in conversation. Villagers drop small pieces of bread into the cauldron, calling it soul bread, meant to honor those who cannot share in the meal. Some believe the rising steam carries prayers to the heavens. Whether symbolic or practical, this act transforms dinner into ritual, blending memory with survival. You inhale deeply, the scent feels rich with both nourishment and reverence. It is well documented that villages often exchanged food directly. A sack of beans might be lent with the promise of repayment after harvest. A wheel of cheese could be cut in half, one half kept, the other gifted. These exchanges created fragile but vital networks of trust. Hoarding was dangerous. Sharing carried risk but was life-sustaining. Maintaining this balance required constant negotiation. Tonight, you witness it firsthand, families weighing generosity against fear. The stew is ladled into wooden bowls. Earthy and smoky, it carries hints of herbs and marrow, warming the throat and spreading heat through the chest. Barley softened by hours of boiling, beans that melt on the tongue, herbs that break monotony, each bite comforts. Laughter rises, spoons clink, and hunger recedes, driven away by the collective effort of many hands. An old man at the table shares a peculiar belief: eating from the same pot binds souls for life, ensuring no one lets another starve. Others nod, partly in agreement, partly in superstition. Literal or not, its emotional significance is clear. Sharing food in winter is a promise of solidarity. Researchers note that these communal meals often served as informal councils. As the pot simmered, villagers discussed planting plans, grievances with the manor, and rumors about the weather. Tonight, murmurs revolve around spring rains, wolves near the forest, and whether the steward might reduce next month's dues. The meal becomes more than nourishment. It becomes strategy, community, survival expressed in whispers. As bowls empty, children scrape the pot eagerly, their laughter blending with the crackle of the fire. Adults smile, weary yet softened. For a moment, the meal has satisfied everyone. Relief is tangible, like a shared exhale. Yet the scene is fragile. Tomorrow, the cauldron will return to a single home. Sharing is not endless, it is occasional and carefully measured. The historical debate about the frequency of such cooperation matters less than the reality before you. When it happened, it transformed lives. You step into the frozen night. The cottage glows warmly behind you, smoke trailing upward. Laughter fades, but the feeling lingers. The shared meal is more than food, it is hope multiplied, fear divided. Even in scarcity, humanity can create abundance, if only for a night. Stars will overhead as you carry the memory of that bubbling pot, barley, beans, marrow, herbs, all stirred by many hands. A recipe not just for stew, but for endurance itself. Moving through the village, the cottages grow smaller, roofs sagging under frost, smoke rising weakly from struggling chimneys. Inside one hut, winter survival looks different. Substitution and compromise rather than sharing. This family stretches what little they have, transforming scarcity into ingenuity. Historical records show peasants often relied on substitutions during the hardest months. When grain ran short, flour was mixed with ground peas, beans, or even pulverized acorns. Bread made from these mixtures was coarse, bitter, sometimes nearly indigestible, but it kept bellies from collapsing. Tonight, you see the mother pour a mix of rye flour and pea meal into a bowl, her hands rough and red from the cold, while the father tends the fire. Nearby, a sack of powdered dried leaves waits to be added to bread, a common technique to bulk up dough. Though the nutrition is limited, the illusion of abundance carries meaning. Biting into a loaf that crumbles, tasting more bark than bread, still sparks relief simply because something fills the stomach. Scholars debate how common these substitutions were. Some argue they were extreme measures during famine. Others suggest stretching flour with wild plants, bran, or weeds was routine. Archaeological finds of bread with seeds, husks, or sand support the latter. Whatever the truth, tonight's loaves carry the story of compromise in every crack. The mother removes a dark, uneven loaf from the oven, slicing thin pieces. Children chew slowly, grimacing at the bitterness. You try a bite, rough grains, a lingering taste, endurance rather than pleasure. Yet the lesson is clear: survival is not about delight, but persistence. Soups were adapted similarly. When cabbage ran short, villagers boiled nettles or sorrel. Tonight, dried nettle leaves simmer on the hearth. Sharp, grassy, watery broth carries surprising warmth. Children sip eagerly, lips stained green as if tasting spring in winter. A grandmother murmurs that eating greens keeps blood warm against the cold and, in some beliefs, wards off evil spirits. Whether superstition or practical, these beliefs added significance to otherwise meager meals. Substitution sometimes approached desperation. Chronicles describe boiling straw mixed with bran or chewing softened leather. Though extreme, such practices demonstrate creativity under pressure. A leather strap hanging by the door reminds you of how far survival stretched ingenuity. Historians debate, were these measures clever resourcefulness or signs of crushing deprivation? Tasting the bitter bread, you sense both truths. The loaf is inventive yet harsh, a reminder of how survival can bend dignity. Children, however, turn these meals into play. Pretending nettle broth is a king's feast, they toast with spoons, imagining themselves noble while chewing bark-flavored bread. Their laughter sparkles, proof that even meager meals can bring joy when imagination is involved. Survival is not only fuel, it is the stories told about the fuel. It is well recorded that such substitutions left marks on health. Diets heavy in bran and weeds often caused bloating, stomach pain, or malnutrition. Yet the ingenuity, ritual, and community woven into these meals illustrate a resilience that endured despite hardship. Yet the emptiness that came as an alternative was even harsher. The parents understood this well, and it shows in the way they press bread firmly into their children's hands, urging them to eat, even if its taste is bitter. Each slice is a small defense against hunger, however imperfect. Later, the father opens a clay jar containing a dark, syrupy liquid, not honey, but boiled-down beet juice, reduced until thick. He drizzles a little over the bread. The sweetness is faint, yet transformative. The children's faces brighten. Even the bitter loaf becomes easier to eat. Such ingenuity, using what the land could provide, added essential variety to otherwise monotonous diets. As night falls, the family gathers together. Their bellies are not full as at a feast, but they are satisfied enough to sleep. The fire burns low. The smell of nettle broth lingers, and the children drift into dreams. The parents sit quietly, hands intertwined, aware they have stretched each scrap one day further. Stepping outside, your breath fogs the icy air. The snow reflects pale moonlight, fields silent beneath. You recognize that substitution, though often bitter, was vital for survival. It transformed scarcity into sustenance, despair into possibility. It taught peasants that endurance could take many forms, even those tasting of bark or nettles. Survival was not always sweet, but it was inventive. Every bitter loaf, green broth, and unusual mixture boiled against hunger reflects a stubborn refusal to surrender to winter. The frost glitters like shattered glass across the fields as you move away from the village. Out here, signs of another quiet lifeline emerge. Even in winter, peasants foraged. They bent over hedgerows, scraped frozen soil, and searched riverbanks for anything edible. Hunger drove them to the margins of nature, coaxing meals from overlooked places. Records show wild plants supplemented diets throughout the year. Summer and autumn brought mushrooms, berries, and herbs. In winter, reliance shifted to stored or dried foods. Yet even in January, beneath deep snow, some peasants turned to bark, roots, or hardy greens clinging to life under frost. Their knowledge of plants was extensive, passed down orally from elder to child. A curious scene appears inside a cottage. A boy empties a pouch onto the table, shriveled crab apples, still edible. The family treats them as treasures, their tartness a sharp contrast to bland porridge. In some areas, apples were strung in rafters and dried into leathery treats. You taste one, the skin tough, the flavor sour and sweet, sunlight trapped in wrinkled skin. It is small joy, but joy nonetheless. Experts debate the reliability of foraging in the harshest months. Some claim wild foods nearly vanished under snow. Others argue that sharp-eyed peasants always found nettles sprouting, roots dug deep, or watercress in icy streams. Archaeological evidence, seeds and berry pits, suggests wild foods appeared on winter tables. The father shows another method, scraping linden bark, drying and grinding it into flour. The resulting bread is coarse, earthy, almost bitter, yet fills the stomach. It is hardly nourishing, but it provides the illusion of fullness. You taste a slice, it crumbles quickly, leaving grit on your tongue. Survival, you realize, often tastes like compromise. A grandmother recounts a peculiar belief: mushrooms gathered under oak trees in summer, dried and eaten in winter, bring protection from hunger and hasten spring. Children giggle, nibbling these leathery slices as if consuming hope itself. Streams and rivers offered hearty watercress and sorrel, collected even through snow. A handful of dried sorrel is added to a stew, turning the broth slightly sour, yet refreshing, a taste of greener seasons. Researchers debate whether peasants relied on foraging or stored staples. Some view wild foods as emergency measures, others see them regularly in meals. Likely both are true. Foraging was not glamorous, but it acted as a safety net when granaries emptied too soon. The family here does not romanticize it, they forage because they must. The children show you roasted acorns, normally bitter, soaked for days to remove tannins, dried, and eaten like nuts. Chewing one, its taste is bland but nutty, chalky in texture, yet it fills the stomach. The effort to gather, soak, and roast each acorn reflects determination. In some villages, hazelnuts were eaten with whispered charms, believed to bring wisdom and luck. A child repeats this tonight, tying survival to ritual, body to spirit. Historians debate whether these wild foods provided real nutrition or just bulk. Some point to vitamins in rose hips or iron in sorrel, others argue the contributions were minimal. Yet when you sip nettle tea, its grassy tang sharp in your throat, you feel its subtle energy. Not abundance, but a spark, enough to ward off despair. Later, the family sits around the hearth. Their foraged items, dried mushrooms, wrinkled apples, roasted acorns, bark bread, nettle tea, form a mosaic of survival. They eat slowly, speaking softly, warmed by more than calories, buoyed by the knowledge that they have coaxed food from a frozen world. Outside, snow crunches underfoot, the moon faint over fields. Hedgerows, bare trees, frozen streams, all are potential sources of sustenance. Winter survival lay not only in barns and granaries but under snow, tucked in branches, or simmering in pots of sour greens. Foraging embodied resilience, a refusal to accept emptiness. Even in barren landscapes, peasants bent low, searched hard, and always found a way. The wind moans through village lanes, but beneath it you hear another sound, the rhythmic hiss of boiling water, the faint bubbling of a large pot. Steam drifts from a chimney, leading you inside. Villagers gather around an oversized cauldron, focused and intent, a quiet testament to winter survival. Tonight isn't about new food, it's about preservation, about safeguarding what little remains so it lasts until spring. Preservation was central to medieval winter survival. Without salt, smoke, drying, or fermentation, food disappeared quickly, leaving families exposed. Peasants developed methods to extend the life of meat, dairy, vegetables, and grains. Their techniques were not refined, but they were clever, turning smoke-filled rooms, cellars, and clay jars into lifelines. A striking detail appears immediately. Above the hearth, strings of fish hang, leathery and pungent, yet oddly comforting. Smoke curls around them, blackening their surfaces. In many villages, fish and eels were smoked in this way, suspended for days until fully dried. The flavor is sharp, salty, almost overwhelming, yet it provides dense energy. Experts debate how accessible salt, the most critical preservative, really was. Some say it was rare inland, reserved for the wealthy. Others argue trade routes supplied villages, though at a cost. Regardless, salt changed survival. Meat rubbed and stored in barrels lasted months instead of days. Tonight, a slab of pork is lowered into brine, its surface glistening with salt. The father presses it down with a wooden lid, sealing both the smell and promise inside. A peculiar custom appears in the grandmother's tale. She insists that salted pork buried under ashes never spoiled, a belief passed through generations. Whether true or not, ashes symbolize safety. In some regions, meat was hidden beneath floorboards to preserve it and protect it from thieves. Fermentation played a vital role as well. Cabbage became sauerkraut, milk turned into curds, and barley brewed into ale, all ways to stretch food into winter. Tonight you sip a thin ale. Its taste is sour, but it warms and nourishes, a reminder that preservation was also transformation. Food became something else, sometimes tastier, sometimes stranger, but always longer lasting. Later, the father opens a clay jar containing a dark, syrupy liquid, not honey, but boiled down beet juice, reduced until thick. He drizzles a little over the bread. The sweetness is faint, yet transformative. The children's faces brighten. Even the bitter loaf becomes easier to eat. Such ingenuity, using what the land could provide, added essential variety to otherwise monotonous diets. As night falls, the family gathers together. Their bellies are not full as at a feast, but they are satisfied enough to sleep. The fire burns low. The smell of nettle broth lingers, and the children drift into dreams. The parents sit quietly, hands intertwined, aware they have stretched each scrap one day further. Stepping outside, your breath fogs the icy air. The snow reflects pale moonlight, fields silent beneath. You recognize that substitution, though often bitter, was vital for survival. It transformed scarcity into sustenance, despair into possibility. It taught peasants that endurance could take many forms, even those tasting of bark or nettles. Survival was not always sweet, but it was inventive. Every bitter loaf, green broth, and unusual mixture boiled against hunger reflects a stubborn refusal to surrender to winter. The frost glitters like shattered glass across the fields as you move away from the village. Out here, signs of another quiet lifeline emerge. Even in winter, peasants foraged. They bent over hedgerows, scraped frozen soil, and searched riverbanks for anything edible. Hunger drove them to the margins of nature, coaxing meals from overlooked places. Records show wild plants supplemented diets throughout the year. Summer and autumn brought mushrooms, berries, and herbs. In winter, reliance shifted to stored or dried foods. Yet even in January, beneath deep snow, some peasants turned to bark, roots, or hardy greens clinging to life under frost. Their knowledge of plants was extensive, passed down orally from elder to child. A curious scene appears inside a cottage. A boy empties a pouch onto the table, shriveled crab apples, still edible. The family treats them as treasures, their tartness a sharp contrast to bland porridge. In some areas, apples were strung in rafters and dried into leathery treats. You taste one, the skin tough, the flavor sour and sweet, sunlight trapped in wrinkled skin. It is small joy, but joy nonetheless. Experts debate the reliability of foraging in the harshest months. Some claim wild foods nearly vanished under snow. Others argue that sharp-eyed peasants always found nettles sprouting, roots dug deep, or watercress in icy streams. Archaeological evidence, seeds and berry pits, suggests wild foods appeared on winter tables. The father shows another method, scraping linden bark, drying and grinding it into flour. The resulting bread is coarse, earthy, almost bitter, yet fills the stomach. It is hardly nourishing, but it provides the illusion of fullness. You taste a slice, it crumbles quickly, leaving grit on your tongue. Survival, you realize, often tastes like compromise. A grandmother recounts a peculiar belief: mushrooms gathered under oak trees in summer, dried and eaten in winter, bring protection from hunger and hasten spring. Children giggle, nibbling these leathery slices as if consuming hope itself. Streams and rivers offered hardy watercress and sorrel, collected even through snow. A handful of dried sorrel is added to a stew, turning the broth slightly sour, yet refreshing, a taste of greener seasons. Researchers debate whether peasants relied on foraging or stored staples. Some view wild foods as emergency measures, others see them regularly in meals. Likely both are true. Foraging was not glamorous, but it acted as a safety net when granaries emptied too soon. The family here does not romanticize it, they forage because they must. The children show you roasted acorns, normally bitter, soaked for days to remove tannins, dried, and eaten like nuts. Chewing one, its taste is bland but nutty, chalky in texture, yet it fills the stomach. The effort to gather, soak, and roast each acorn reflects determination. In some villages, hazelnuts were eaten with whispered charms, believed to bring wisdom and luck. A child repeats this tonight, tying survival to ritual, body to spirit. Historians debate whether these wild foods provided real nutrition or just bulk. Some point to vitamins in rose hips or iron in sorrel, others argue the contributions were minimal. Yet when you sip nettle tea, its grassy tang sharp in your throat, you feel its subtle energy. Not abundance, but a spark, enough to ward off despair. Later, the family sits around the hearth. Their foraged items, dried mushrooms, wrinkled apples, roasted acorns, bark bread, nettle tea, form a mosaic of survival. They eat slowly, speaking softly, warmed by more than calories, buoyed by the knowledge that they have coaxed food from a frozen world. Outside, snow crunches underfoot, the moon faint over fields. Hedgerows, bare trees, frozen streams, all are potential sources of sustenance. Winter survival lay not only in barns and granaries but under snow, tucked in branches, or simmering in pots of sour greens. Foraging embodied resilience, a refusal to accept emptiness. Even in barren landscapes, peasants bent low, searched hard, and always found a way. The wind moans through village lanes, but beneath it you hear another sound, the rhythmic hiss of boiling water, the faint bubbling of a large pot. Steam drifts from a chimney, leading you inside. Villagers gather around an oversized cauldron, focused and intent, a quiet testament to winter survival. Tonight isn't about new food, it's about preservation, about safeguarding what little remains so it lasts until spring. Preservation was central to medieval winter survival. Without salt, smoke, drying, or fermentation, food disappeared quickly, leaving families exposed. Peasants developed methods to extend the life of meat, dairy, vegetables, and grains. Their techniques were not refined, but they were clever, turning smoke-filled rooms, cellars, and clay jars into lifelines. A striking detail appears immediately. Above the hearth, strings of fish hang, leathery and pungent, yet oddly comforting. Smoke curls around them, blackening their surfaces. In many villages, fish and eels were smoked in this way, suspended for days until fully dried. The flavor is sharp, salty, almost overwhelming, yet it provides dense energy. Experts debate how accessible salt, the most critical preservative, really was. Some say it was rare inland, reserved for the wealthy. Others argue trade routes supplied villages, though at a cost. Regardless, salt changed survival. Meat rubbed and stored in barrels lasted months instead of days. Tonight, a slab of pork is lowered into brine, its surface glistening with salt. The father presses it down with a wooden lid, sealing both the smell and promise inside. A peculiar custom appears in the grandmother's tale. She insists that salted pork buried under ashes never spoiled, a belief passed through generations. Whether true or not, ashes symbolize safety. In some regions, meat was hidden beneath floorboards to preserve it and protect it from thieves. Fermentation played a vital role as well. Cabbage became sauerkraut, milk turned into curds, and barley brewed into ale, all ways to stretch food into winter. Tonight you sip a thin ale. Its taste is sour, but it warms and nourishes, a reminder that preservation was also transformation. Food became something else, sometimes tastier, sometimes stranger, but always longer lasting. Winter does not stop the hunt for fish, it only makes it harsher, colder, more uncertain. Yet they persist, risking numb fingers and soaked boots for something fresh and alive. Local accounts confirm fish provided vital winter sustenance. Streams, rivers, and ponds were lifelines, offering protein when livestock was scarce. For peasants observing fasting rules, fish held religious significance, appearing in countless meals when meat was forbidden. Eels wriggled from muddy banks, trout darted beneath ice, and in coastal villages, salted herring traveled inland by barrel. A curious moment unfolds as a boy plunges his bare arm into freezing water to pull a carp from a net. He yelps at the cold, then laughs, holding it aloft. The fish thrashes, silver scales flashing like coins. In some villages, fish caught mid-ice were considered lucky, a sign of abundance to come. The children shout that this catch will bring good fortune in spring. Scholars debate how accessible fishing really was for peasants. Many rivers and lakes were controlled by lords with strict anti-poaching laws. Some argue villages risked fines or worse to fish illegally, while others note small communal ponds were stocked for peasant use. Likely, both were true. Some fished openly, others furtively, sneaking out under moonlight. The debate lingers like ripples on water. Men lay the fish on straw by the bank, where they stiffen in the cold. A mother cleans a perch with swift hands, tossing guts to the waiting dogs. She salts the flesh quickly, rubbing crystals into the skin before it spoils. Salted fish lasts for days, maybe weeks, to be carried back to cottages, boiled with barley or fried in precious lard. Eels, in particular, were beloved, slippery, resilient, surviving cold better than many fish, often stored alive in muddy tubs until needed. Tonight, a wriggling eel slips from a boy's grip, twisting across the ice before being caught again. Villagers laugh, calling it the snake of the river. Half jest, half respect. To them, the eel embodies stubborn life. One unusual belief emerges from a fisherman's tale. Fish pulled from ice carry winter spirit. To eat them is to steal strength from the season itself. Neighbors nod, not entirely joking. Faith and folklore cling to the catch as tightly as the nets. Inside a cottage, the day's prize is cooked. A gutted carp simmers in a clay pot with onions and herbs. The smell is earthy, savory, sharper than meat. The broth turns cloudy, the fish softening, bones delicate but hazardous. You sip carefully. The taste is rich, fresher than anything dried or salted. Children grin, slurping the soup, lips glistening with oil. For one night they eat like royalty. Experts debate fish's role in balancing diets. Some claim it provided essential proteins and oils, otherwise lacking in winter. Others argue its contribution was minor due to small catches inland. Yet as you chew a tender flake, the impact is undeniable: warmth, energy, satisfaction. A single fish divides into many bowls, each mouthful carrying hope. Later, villagers gather the remaining catch into barrels, layering it with salt. The pungent, briny smell clings to hair and clothes. The father grumbles about the cost of salt but rubs it in anyway, knowing each grain extends survival. Tomorrow the fish will be less fresh but still edible. Preservation is a bargain peasants cannot ignore. As the night wears on, one peculiar custom lingers in memory. In some villages, the bones of the first fish caught each year were buried beneath the hearth, believed to protect households from hunger. Tonight, a grandmother slips a fish head under the straw, whispering her thanks. Whether charm or custom, the gesture reflects respect for the creature that gave itself to the meal. As dinner ends, children lick their fingers, bellies warm. The parents smile quietly. For a day, the tension of hunger is eased. The fish bones rattle into a bowl destined for tomorrow's broth. Nothing is wasted, not even the fins. Stepping outside into the biting cold, laughter from the cottage fades, replaced by the creak of ice forming on the pond. Stars glimmer overhead, and you reflect on the day's catch. Fishing was never guaranteed. It was laborious, risky, and sometimes against the law. Yet it also brought joy. Silver fish pulled from dark waters, hope flapping in nets. Walking back to the village, the smell of fish broth clinging to your cloak, you understand. Winter survival demanded persistence. Fields might be barren, but rivers still whispered. Beneath the ice, life stirred, waiting for those brave enough to reach into the freezing dark. Snow lies deep, muting sound and light alike. Inside one larger cottage, a different hush fills the room. Tonight, it is not the bubbling of broth or clatter of spoons that holds attention, but the hum of voices, the ritual of storytelling around the hearth. The pot is half empty, the bread gone, yet the air feels abundant. Words themselves provide sustenance, bringing warmth where food cannot. Chronicles and folklore record that peasants wove stories as carefully as they wove baskets. Tales of saints multiplying loaves, heroes defeating hunger spirits, and ancestors surviving harsher winters offered courage. These stories were not distractions. They were as vital as salted pork or rye flour. Belief in survival was sometimes half the battle. A child asks for a story of the bread that never ended. The grandmother obliges, recounting a woman who hid a loaf beneath her pillow and found it whole each morning. The children laugh, chewing their crusts slowly, as if each bite might magically return. These tales offered more than fantasy, they comforted young bellies familiar with emptiness. Scholars debate their origins: pagan fertility myths, Christian miracles, or simple fables of thrift. Records are inconclusive, but villagers do not question. They smile, letting stories wrap around them like blankets, warming the spirit. The father shares his tale of wolves at the edge of the fields, howling each night and scaring villagers into guarding their grain. The children squeal with delight, imagining wolves as guardians rather than threats. Around the hearth, fear transforms into laughter, making danger bearable. Songs, too, filled these nights. Work songs became lullabies, harvest chants became winter hymns. Their rhythms connected villagers to past and future seasons. Tonight, the family hums a simple tune as the grandmother stirs the coals, calming hearts alongside the fire. A curious ritual follows. The mother pulls a small pouch of saved grain, not for planting but for blessing. She casts 3 kernels into the fire, whispering wishes for abundance. In some regions, this fed spirits of the fields. In others, it quietly sustained hope when cupboards were bare. Sparks rise, crackling like tiny carriers of her wishes. Historians debate whether such rituals truly lifted morale or were simply habit. Watching the children's faces as they follow the sparks, the answer is clear: belief is not a luxury, it is survival, as vital as bread or broth. The family shares the last of their weak, sour cider slowly, passing the cup from hand to hand. Stories resume, some silly, some sacred, each carrying a lesson. Others endured, others survived, and so shall we. The final crust of bread tastes plain, but the stories add seasoning. Every bite feels larger with laughter, every swallow easier when faith accompanies it. Folklore thrived in the darkest season because it fed a hunger deeper than the stomach. Later, as the children drift to sleep, the grandmother hums again, her voice mingling with the crackle of the fire. Parents sit silently, shoulders touching, gazes on glowing coals. No grand feast tonight, no abundance, but the room feels alive, sustained by words, songs, and rituals as much as food. Stepping outside into the still night, the snow glimmers under the stars, the cold pressing against your skin, yet warmth lingers inside, carried by voices around the fire. Winter survival was never only about meat, grain, or beans, it relied on resilience woven into stories, laughter, rituals, and songs. Invisible nourishment carried hope when cupboards were bare. Walking away from the cottage, you understand. Peasants endured not only through what they ate, but through what they believed. As your journey ends, slow your breathing. Imagine lying beside the old hearth, the fire dimming to gentle embers, the air thick with wood smoke and the scent of rye bread. Stories of winters past linger, softened by distance. You hear branches crackle outside, wind whispering through thatched roofs, villages settling into rest. Grain boiled into porridge, cheese ripened, honey dripping into bowls, bones boiled until they spoke. Laughter over communal pots, prayers whispered over scraps, songs sung to children cleaning bowls. Each fragment becomes a candle lighting centuries of cold nights. Though winters were harsher than any you may know, their spirit endures, gentle, strong, like your own steady breath. Snow falls softly, not as threat but as blanket, covering fields once prowled by hunger. Inside, warmth remains in voices, the fire, and the assurance that tomorrow brings another meal, another story. Let thoughts slow like cooling coals. Let eyes grow heavy, as if the weight of centuries rests kindly on your shoulders. The final image, a village sleeping under snow, safe in the knowledge that even in the harshest winters, people found ways to endure, laugh, and love. Sweet dreams.